3, 2, 1.
Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, February 25th, 2021 meeting of the Northampton School Committee. I'm Mayor David Narkowitz, the chair of the school committee. This meeting is being held as an online Zoom meeting pursuant to Governor Baker's emergency order modifying the state's open meeting law. This meeting is being audio and video recorded and is being broadcast on Northampton Open Media. I would ask participants to stay muted during the meeting until we reach a point where there's a public comment period, just so that there's not background noise for other speakers and for the conduct of the meeting. This evening, well, I'll start by calling the roll call of the school committee meeting, and then we'll move into the agenda. So Annie, if you would please call the roll of the school committee.
Mayor Narkowitz.
Present.
Member Busansky.
Present.
Member Fallon.
Present.
Member Seraphy Cox.
Present.
Member Condon.
Present.
Member Levy. I know I saw her.
Hear me? Present.
Oh, I can hear you now, yeah. Member Kaufman.
Present.
Member Goldman.
Present.
Member Voss.
Present.
And Member Gold.
Present.
Your Honor, you have a quorum.
Okay, so tonight's meeting was scheduled as one of our second meetings in February for the purpose of the superintendent presenting the first view budget for fiscal year 2022, which begins on July 1st, and the school committee is required by charter to develop a budget for the district and submit it to the city by April 15th. And so we do have a public comment period on the agenda this evening. I was going to suggest that if you have, when we've done this meeting in the past, we've often deferred public comment on the budget until after the budget presentation. But I know that there are folks here who would like to comment on other matters besides the budget. So I would keep the public comment period, but I would also say that if there are folks who want to watch the budget presentation from the superintendent, which is the one order of business we have on the agenda, that I could allow for public comment after the presentation of the budget. But obviously, if you cannot stay and want to give comment, that's certainly within your purview. We don't have a superintendent report. That's something that normally happens at our regular meetings. And so, but the superintendent did want to provide a brief message to the school committee and more importantly to the broader school community. So before I go into public comment, I am going to turn to Dr. Provost and allow him to make that his comments, and then we'll move into the public comment period. Dr. Provost.
Thank you very much. I know we're here to discuss the budget, but given the events of the past few days, it would be irresponsible for me not to use the privilege of this position and this platform to speak to the spiritual needs of our community before addressing its material needs. There are moments when this work breaks my heart in the most beautiful way, when someone from the community reaches out to share a profoundly human need, trusting that they'll be heard. I share the communication I'm about to talk about with permission. It comes from the parent of two students of color in our district who asked whether it would be within my scope to make a public statement, especially to address the children of the Northampton Public Schools. She wrote, it would mean so much for her children to hear that they are safe, loved, and valued by all here in our community, and not just by their parent. You can imagine how that struck me as a parent an educator, and a member of the school community. So now I'd like to speak directly to her two children and to all the children of color in our district. Let me begin by saying, you matter. You deserve to be safe, loved, and valued by all here in our community. I know there are times when you do not feel safe, loved, and valued, and that's not fair to you. There are many people in the schools who care deeply for you. Sometimes we make mistakes that can be hurtful to you. We are spending a lot of time helping each other improve our behavior so we can make fewer mistakes. I personally spend a lot of time thinking about how to keep you safe and will keep working to make you feel safer. I love you and I want to learn to love you better. And I value you and I want you to feel valued by our schools. Next, I'd like to talk to some of the white folks in our community. Consider this mother's request. Isn't feeling safe, loved, and valued exactly what you would want for yourselves or for your own children? I would say these are almost universal parental desires. I know these are the values that many of you teach your own children. And at the same time, we have work to do. Young people are constantly exposed to the potential influence of hate groups, and we've seen this manifest in behaviors such as displaying the Confederate flag and swastikas and defacing our schools with racist and homophobic graffiti, all of which prevent students from feeling safe, loved, and valued. And I've seen tremendous growth in the number of students who are willing to be upstanders when they see such obvious or less obvious acts of aggression toward their peers, which is a hopeful development. And at this time, I feel the need to stand up for Principal Caldwell, not only to once again denounce the commenters on Facebook, but also to name something else that's been troubling me. I fear he's also being victimized by some of us who are his supporters who have thrust him into a very difficult position. When he first made his video, Principal Caldwell was very clear that he intended this as his personal message for his students. He wasn't seeking international fame. I understand why so many people wanted to share his beautiful message. He's an eloquent speaker who stirs up your heart. I felt that watching his video, and again when I listened to him speak yesterday at JFK. But this is a lot of pressure to put on anyone, let alone someone who is finding his way through his first year in the district in the midst of a pandemic. He's assured me he's built for this, and he told us all that he felt like he was born to give the talk he gave yesterday. But I also know it's only possible to maintain this pace for so long. And I want Principal Caldwell to have enough gas in the tank to make it to the finish line. He may be our best talker, but we can't let him be our only talker. That's not fair. And it's not fair to use his video to convey the things we want to say. There are plenty of things to be said, and it's easy enough to make our own videos. When this meeting gets posted, I'll be happy to add this segment to the NPS video library. I want to make sure those girls hear the words their mothers wanted me to hear me say. I want them to know that if it helped at all, to make them feel safe, loved, and valued by our school community. And so I'll be sending this video directly to that parent. And so I just wanted to frame that. We're going to be talking about the budget in a few minutes, and you'll see that there's a strong emphasis on equity in our budget proposal this year. And I hope some of the energy and goodwill that's been developed over the course of the past few days can carry forward into the budget proposals that we present tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Provost. Thank you for those words and for that statement. And I think it goes without saying that the school committee stands in support of those words, and obviously in support of those children and those families, and in support of Principal Caldwell as well. So thank you. So we now have public comment period on our agenda. And so using the Zoom platform, I would ask folks who are interested in making a public comment to use the raise hand function, raise their hand. If you're on a phone, you may have to use the *6 function to be able to raise your hand. Zoom has changed some of their buttons now, so it's not always under the participant list. You may have to go under the reaction list to find the hand, but I'll go through them. I'll give you each person 3 minutes and I'll time it. And I would just ask folks to be respectful. Could folks also just mute their mics? Everyone just go ahead and mute. And then I'll ask you to unmute when the time comes to speak, just so that we don't have background noise for speakers. So the first person who has, I'm sorry, I know one of our administrators has their hand raised. Lori Valancourt, Principal Valancourt, did you want to add something?
If it's okay, I would like to also make a statement on behalf of the administrative leadership team.
Sure, go ahead, Principal Valancourt.
Also in support of our colleague Desmond. So on behalf of the Northampton administrative leadership team, I would like to publicly state that we as a team denounce white supremacy, overt and subtle statements and symbols and actions that promote hate or division. We serve together to end white supremacy by learning, educating, making change in policy through the lens of equity and access, and holding firm to our values. We stand in solidarity as comrades and friends with our colleague Desmond Caldwell. Desmond was hired by the district to lead JFK students and staff. He is an academic leader. He's dedicated to building relationships and maintaining a safe and supported community. This is his work. And as the administrative leadership team, we recognize that it is not the charge of Desmond to lift, to unite, to heal the existing racial hate. Yet yesterday, he publicly stated, I was born to do this work.
He's got Mary Labarge.
You can.
If you're not muted, thank you. Yesterday, he stated, I was born to do this work. Desmond and the people of Northampton, tonight, I want you to know that we link arms with Mr. Caldwell, that we stand stronger together, that our role is to lift him, to clear the path for him to do the important work that he was hired to do as a principal. Free white supremacy. We will continue with conversation, planning, and becoming a better team by his side. This is not Desmond's work alone, but it is our collective responsibility to stand up and say, not in our city and not in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Valancourt. Okay, so I'm now going to begin going through the list, and again, ask folks if you could just state your name and where you live for the record, and I will set a 3-minute timer and just ask you to please respect the time so that folks have an opportunity to be heard equally. The first hand that is up is Jose, and last name A, initial A. Jose, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you everyone for your outright dismissals and sort of denouncements of white supremacy. I really appreciate that. And I live in Northampton. I organize locally, and I am a sort of local anti-racist educator, I guess. And I really appreciate the statement that the principal has made, and I grew up here, and I also witnessed Confederate flags when I was a child here. And so that has sort of been a part of the culture here. And I think that it goes without saying that when those types of things are around, that there's not really you know, that all of the words in the world can't provide a feeling of safety for children that are brown and Black. That no matter how much support that we show, there's going to be a feeling for them that, you know, when one of my first outright racist experiences was I got dropped off at the bus stop in front of Smith at the theater, and someone with a Confederate flag yelled out a derogatory term for Hispanics at me. And it was the first time, you know, I was like, you can tell, you know, from the truck. But you know, it is, you know, common in this area. And I appreciate the principal's approach. And I would like to urge people, as far as I know, some people have asked me if I know about REAL. And as far as I know, everything I've heard about REAL is positive. So I have faith that going forward, that everything will be addressed appropriately. And I also want to encourage people not to engage with the groups online, because I've seen a lot of like back and forth, and that's really not, you know, as the principal said, that's not what's gonna get it through. These are children. They need our patience and compassion and understanding. And I think that everyone really needs to follow the principal's lead here and shows real solidarity. And, you know, as far as I've seen, I appreciate the message that the principal is sending, that the provost is sending, and that the administration is sending. And I hope that, you know, continues being, you know, I hope that conviction stays as strong going forward. Thank you all for your time, and I appreciate you being here, and good health to you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you for your comments. The next person whose hand is raised to speak is Willa Polan. Willa?
Hi, my name is Willa Polan, and I'm in 8th grade at JFK. I love my teachers, I love my school, and I love my new principal. I've seen the Confederate flag in my school hallways or even in the backgrounds on Zoom. This symbol hurts me and people that I care about, like my teachers and friends. This is a symbol of hate in a place that is supposed to be safe. It doesn't belong in our schools. I believe that a better world is possible, and I believe banning the Confederate flag is one step closer to that better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. The next person who has their hand raised is Jenny Bender. Jenny, you can go ahead and unmute.
This is Shanna Fishel. You sent me a request to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, that was for Jenny. Jenny, are you still there?
I am. I'm having some, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes,
I'm having some technical issues. Hi, my name is Jenny Bender. I'm a JFK and an NHS caregiver, and I'd like to read a statement on behalf of REAL, Racial Equity and Learning, Northampton. Though Willa just said it just as well as it could be said. Thank you, Willa. Hate symbols and hate speech are among the violent acts that contribute to unsafe environments for our students, staff, and teachers, and they cannot be tolerated any more than physical acts of violence. The current threat to the safety of our BIPOC community members by the presence of hate symbols is not at all diminished by the fact that our school buildings are not being accessed by as many people as in a typical year. Harm is still being done. Safety is still being threatened. While in this moment, many in our district are rallying in response to particular actions unfolding on social media, white supremacist ideology is not limited to online spaces, and it is enabled by the racism that is baked into our country's foundation. Racism that is alive and well in Northampton as everywhere. What was initiated on social media may be the work of an individual or individuals, but it is not an isolated event, and it is a call to action for us all. We believe, and we're confident that the school committee believes with us, that in order to stand against white supremacy and for an anti-racist school district, the school committee must ban representations of the Confederate flag, which have no place in Northampton public schools, whether in person or virtually. Thank you very much.
thank you for your comments, Jenny. Now we'll move to Shanna Fishel. Sorry, Shanna, I inadvertently unmuted you before because Jenny disappeared as I was unmuting her. So you now have the floor.
Thank you. Shanna Fishel leads Northampton. Leads, do you hear me? I'm in my car. Just make sure that.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And I really thank all the opening statements. It is nice to know that even though this is a budget meeting, that priority is our human spirit and healing and repair and not business as usual. And I think that means a lot, both to myself and members of the community of color. And I'm hope that the actions moving forward will represent these words in ways that our community can feel and know that the community does care about them. So I wanted to highlight not only the emotional impact of all of this, and I'm sure echoing what have already said and will say forward about denouncing white supremacy and any symbols and speech and behavior that symbolizes that. But I also want to connect it to the school budget and hope that tonight you can emphasize how those budgetary stipulations will reflect those words. I believe that it's President Biden that just said that show me your budget and I'll see your values. And I hope that that will carry on in our budget. The things that I would hope that to see in this budget and any changes that are able to make if it's not already there, and I recognize that equity is part of it, is first monetary support for any BIPOC leaders in our community, parents and kids alike, to work with our white allies, but yet to pay the monetary value for the emotional labor that our families of color will invest when they are leading the way for Principal Cardwell and the rest of the administration to make changes our school. And as a Jew, I also say that I'm sure that the large Jewish community, as well as the Muslim community in Northampton, whether of color or not, we'll take this to heart and we'll work together as a unified community towards actionable items that will reflect in which money will support those families that are vulnerable to hate crimes the most, to make sure that their action moving forward are monetized. In addition, I'm hoping that to see monetary budget that are set aside for increased mental health, family engagement, and outreach and programming specifically for our families of color. And I'm saying families, it's not the students, but the parents and those and the caregivers. And how can we increase the mental health access, not as an overall service for all of the population, but specifically those that are impacted by racist behaviors, words, and symbol in our schools and community at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments, Shanna. The next person who has their hand raised to speak is, sorry, that's my timer, is Karen Hidalgo. Karen, you can unmute.
Hi, I'm Karen Hidalgo. I live at 133 Barrett Street in Northampton, and I have a child at Jackson Street, a child at JFK, and I work at the high school. I'm glad to hear the statements people have been making against white supremacy, and our community has been dealing with some blatant issues of white supremacy recently. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about systemic issues of racism and the ways that they play out in our town and our schools, which is not unique. What I'm about to say about Northampton would apply to other places as well. One of the ways that systemic racism plays out is that our students end up being separated a lot. And I think at the high school, some of that has to do with honors and AP classes. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can and should be looking at this problem. But one thing that I've been really happy with this year is that our math department has combined in the integrated math 1 classes, the honors and the college preparatory classes, so that students are learning together in the same room. It's not a complete answer to the problem at all, but it's a step in the right direction. And I was really grateful that they've begun doing that. I also wanted to say that I was really appreciative of Dr. Provost and Mr. Caldwell's responses to the incidents that have happened, and that I'm really grateful to be a member of this community, and that this week and this year I've been particularly grateful for my children's teachers, Nick Ames, the Green Rouse, the 7th grade hybrid team, and my coworkers at Northampton High School. I'm just super grateful for this community. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for your comments. The next person whose hand is raised is Echo Giha.
Yes. Hi. How are you? I get nervous public speaking. Sorry. I just want to say that I'm loving what everyone's saying, and especially the in terms of making the budget come through in these really profound areas that can enhance our community in this in our anti-racist movement. And I am just really raising my hand to put my vote in for banning the Confederate flag. Just as it was in East Hampton and all over the United States, it's being banned because it should just no longer be an option. So I hope that our school committee votes to get it out of our schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person that has their hand raised is, it's a long title, so it kind of runs off, but Halia Friedman Cassis, and then I lose the other name. So go ahead and let us know who's there and where you're from. And
yeah, sure. It's Noah Cassis.
Oh, hey Noah. Okay, sorry, your name kind of ran off the page.
No
so
worries.
Apologies.
You want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Halia, and I'm in 7th grade at JFK.
I'm Noah. I'm a senior at Northampton High School. And yeah, we're here together. We're siblings. And here because our family has been really upset about the situation this week, and really believe that.
There's someone named Noah Friedman.
All right, thank you. And just here to ask the school committee to move to ban the display of Confederate imagery in the public schools. There's a lot of talk generally about how this is a civil liberties issue or a First Amendment issue. We see that countries in Europe are a lot smarter around this and decide flat out to not allow fascist imagery and white supremacist imagery. And there's really no reason we can't take that same step. We know that the First Amendment has limitations, and that includes displaying hate imagery in schools. So yeah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it terrifies me to see this really hateful imagery, where I'm learning, and I can't even imagine what it must be like for other people who are affected by it even more. And so I think it's really unfair to let this keep going around. And so I think that it should definitely be banned.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Thanks for your comments. And just again, a reminder to folks, if you could just keep yourself muted during the meeting. So let's go to our next speaker, Maritha Wallace.
Hi, it's Maritha.
Oh, sorry, Maritha, sorry.
No worries. I just would like to publicly say that this has been a hard week for Black and Brown folks. And I just wanted to put it out there that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to not want to talk about it. What is not okay is that we don't talk about it. And again, while some of this is hurtful, okay, all of it is hurtful and hard, silence is not an option any longer. It can't happen. And it has happened so many times. And where I am, what I believe in is to stand firmly. I do stand firmly behind Mr. Caldwell and his acts. and his acts of what he has said and what he has done for the Northampton community. While I did grow up in Amherst, I hold those values very close to me, very close to my heart, that racism in any way, shape, or form, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism should not be allowed. And it's easier for people to talk about the swastika because people realize that what it means for Jewish people. But they don't have that same feeling around the Confederate flag. And I think it is time as a community that we start talking about it and allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable, because talking about this is uncomfortable. We need to get used to it. And I'm trying not to be mad or frustrated or whatever. I've worked in Northampton for 5 years, and I
Are you there, Maritha? We've lost your audio, I think. Are you there?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can, yeah. We lost your audio for a minute there.
Okay. I will walk this walk with Des. I practice what I preach, and I speak directly and I speak clearly. I'm sorry if people don't like that or call me the mad Black woman. I'm good with that because I am mad. I am 48 years old and I'm dealing with stuff that my parents and my grandparents are dealing with, have dealt with. So please hear me when I say I will call it out. I will call my colleagues as well as anyone else in the community to speak up. Silence equals death. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maritha. The next person is Maddie Parry. Maddie?
Hi, I am a sophomore from NHS and I live in Holyoke. I just wanted to speak about the protest that happened from the football players a few days ago. I feel highly let down by my school in the way they handled the protest by the football players. After the protest, I don't know if it was everyone, but I got an email, and so did a bunch of the other students got an email regarding the protest. And in that email, the administration told us that the football team has become the target of online harassment. But they failed to mention what the football team was doing to us, the people who were calling them out. They did not mention the transphobia, homophobia, sexism, and racism coming from the football team. I got harassed and bullied on my sexuality, pronouns, looks, intelligence, and beliefs. One hate comment I got said, just based off your profile picture and bio alone, you have absolutely no brain left. And I got many others just like these, just for stating what I believe. Some of these players made burner accounts to go after myself and my friends just for calling out their behavior. I wish the administration would call out these players and their friends and not sweep it under the rug and actually acknowledge what these people have done and are actively doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. The next person whose hand is raised is Sherry Hall Smith.
Hi, everyone. Sharon Hall Smith, 41 Park Hill Road in Florence. I had 2 children of color who attended the Northampton Public Schools, and they had experienced quite a range of difficult racial experiences while they were there, both large and small, starting as early as kindergarten and all the way through. The really difficult thing for me was always the lack of public response and sometimes lack of response at all from the schools. So I really appreciate Principal Caldwell. I saw his video and I was really quite moved at how he was standing up for all the students in a way I just hadn't experienced with my own kids. And so obviously I want to thank him for that. And I also appreciate hearing the statements that were made this evening by other administrators around, issues of white supremacy culture, the Confederate flag, And I really just want to encourage everyone to continue, because as one of our previous speakers said, you know, it's really important that we bring these things out in the open, talk about them. We cannot ignore them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. The next person whose hand is raised is Sarah Churchill Windsor. Sarah?
Hello, my name is Sarah Churchill Windsor. I'm a special education teacher in 6th grade at JFK Middle School. I live in Deerfield. Over the years, discussions around the Confederate flag have been passionate. I myself have gotten into verbal disagreements over this topic many times, as I have family members that live in the South and claim that it is part of their heritage. Well, I call baloney on that. And I could spend much time dissecting the lack of merits in adherence to a flag for a failed nation that lasted for a shorter time than DoorDash, Instagram, and Uber. I looked those up. In Education 101, we learned that Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that, among other needs, safety must come before a child is able to focus on learning. This flag has become ubiquitously affiliated with racial discrimination, hate, white supremacy, violence, and racism. It is more than just offensive. It is threatening, it is intimidating, and it makes people feel genuine fear for their safety. You, as the school committee, have the duty to shut down the use of these symbols that have caused and will continue to cause considerable interference to the learning environment. The leadership that Principal Caldwell has displayed around this topic in his short time in this district have been an awe-inspiring start that provides the momentum that we need to exploit for the benefit of our school and for our humanity. When there is danger so blatantly disruptive to BIPOC students' ability to have a safe learning environment, we must intervene. We cannot continue to wear blinders to racism and white supremacy. We must educate, we must engage in uncomfortable conversations, and we must ban the representation of this symbol of hate that is apparent in the Confederate flag. Please exercise your ability to formally denounce the hate that is hurting my friends, my colleagues, and our students. Ban the flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. The next person whose hand is raised is Amy Martin. Amy?
Hi. I am a parent to a high school student and join the chorus of others asking for the ban of the Confederate flag. And also thank you, Superintendent Provost and Principal Valancourt, for your strong statements at the beginning of this meeting. It's almost exactly a year ago before I actually stood before the school committee in person with a few other parents to ask for the district to more fully respond to the tragic death by suicide of Nevaeh Molina, a high school student, and to the environment of racism and bullying that are part of the high school environment that she lived in every day. The school's, of course, closed to in-person learning 3 days later, and COVID has been an enormous focus for us all since. But we had an uprising in the time since then, too, with a renewed urgent call for racial justice in this country. And of course, here we are tonight with the reasoned, compassionate call from Principal Caldwell to not have symbols of murderous hate displayed in the school community. And of course, responded to this week with an anonymous racist attack on him. A ban on displays of the Confederate flag should be the low bar of what happens now. As people have mentioned, this is happening everywhere. New York State has banned display of the Confederate flag and other hate symbols on state property. I know for some, it's not necessarily an easy bar to jump. Even so, some people need to work through their understanding of freedom of speech versus how to respond to hate speech. But when you think about if a display of a sexist slur would be tolerated or a depiction of a swastika, I think the path forward is clear. But I'm also equally concerned about the larger context of racism in our district. I think that this incident points to the need for comprehensive ongoing race equity planning for the elementary, middle, and high school with benchmarks for goals related to staffing, anti-racist curriculum, professional development, budgeting for this work. And I appreciate that you mentioned, Superintendent Provost, that there are funds in this budget for equity work, but I think it needs to be an ongoing standard for caregiver engagement. And I think that in order to hold ourselves accountable for this work, we have to collect data on how we are meeting those benchmarks. And there need to be reports regularly given to the school committee and the community at large. And maybe some of this is happening already, but I'm not aware that there is this kind of comprehensive planning. I think with a greater level of transparency and accountability about how we are creating or working to create an inclusive, safe, respectful school community, the one that we all want, that if we have measurable goals that are reported on, then we really not only show the district's commitment to race equity, but we move closer to achieving it. Start with a ban on display of all hate symbols and commit to deeper, transparent, measurable process of racial equity transformation. We really, this week's events just once again make it really clear that we desperately need this in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for your comments. The next person who has their hand up is Evan Lebeau. Evan?
Hi, yes. My name is Evan Lebeau, and I am a senior at Northampton High School. Over the past few months, all across this country, there has been a rise in hatred. It has become harder and harder for people to agree on pretty much everything. And that is true here in Western Mass and here in Northampton. And we have begun to let hatred back into our environment and into our learning environment. Our schools should be a safe place for every single student, and thoughts of hatred have no place in our learning environment, and students should only have to focus on their studies while in school or on their Zoom class. I have been in community meetings that have been Zoom bombed with racist, homophobic Zoom bombers coming in and disturbing the meetings and calling people horrible things. And it upsets me that we are at a place in this nation where we have to deal with this still. And in a place like Northampton, we should not have to even be having a conversation on whether or not to ban the Confederate flag. This should be a foregone conclusion. It should have previously been decided. There's no place for it in our community. There's definitely no place for it in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. Appreciate your comments. Let's go now to Annie Salsich. Annie, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, I am a caregiver to a third grader in Bridge Street. I'm also a member of REAL. And I just first want to say huge gratitude to the students who are speaking up, to everyone, but truly remarkable to the students. You are setting the stage for all of us and how we talk about this as a community. So thank you for raising your voices. I think everything that's going on is a real call to action for all of us. I think it's a perfect topic for a night in which a budget is the key conversation today, just echoing what others have said. It's the ideal time to talk about how to actually allocate and commit in a fierce and relentless way to anti-racist training, education, coaching, support, restorative practices, all of that. And it's also a time to think about, many have spoke about this, but about rallying the outward facing, repetitive and norm setting statements about anti-racism in Northampton, so that these statements are the norm, not the anomaly, from the people at the highest level of leadership truly on a day-to-day basis, in classrooms, by caregivers, by our young people, by PTOs, by school councils, by the school committee members. This should be, of all the topics in our country and our district right now, one of, if not the loudest and most constant and most communal things that are put out there, so that no one leader can be targeted. And I think it's a call to all of us to do that, and to do it relentlessly and unapologetically all the time, even if labels are put on that, if people get annoyed with it, if it's too much. This is what we should be doing right now. So it goes without saying that I strongly support the ban on the display, the ban of the display of the Confederate flag. I think it's a given. I think it would be a shame and heartbreaking for us as a district to not do that right now. It doesn't mean that it stops the conversation. It just means that we say it's not allowed here, it is not safe, and we're going to respond in a restorative but heartfelt, honest, again, unapologetic way when it occurs. So appreciate everyone's time here tonight, and all the leaders and students and teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. The next person whose hand is raised is Tom Niels Duffy. Tom?
Hi, I'm actually going to be speaking. My name is Lila Niels Duffy, and I'm a 9th grader at Northampton High School. And I just first wanted to say that I also agree with the ban on the Confederate flag, but I also wanted to speak about, just briefly, about the football situation. And I just want to say, I know that some of the comments made towards the football players were unnecessary, but the school's response didn't acknowledge the homophobia and transphobia in the comments, that some of which was directed at my friends. And I was just disappointed that that wasn't acknowledged by the school, and just the stuff about the football players was. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next person, actually the final person who has their hand raised, is Jacqueline Johnson. Jacqueline?
Thank you. And thank you for everyone coming to the table to have this conversation. I know it's in uncertain times and what feels like really chaotic times. But I wanted to share a little piece about myself. My name is Jacqueline Johnson. I live in the city of Springfield, and I'm a product of Northampton Public Schools. And I wear that with a badge of honor. Northampton Public Schools allowed me to create an identity of strength, trust, and commitment to a community that is engaging, loving, and caring. And I've done extremely well for myself. And when I heard of this situation, well, one of the opportunity to ban this horrible symbol, I felt compelled to join on tonight's call, and also what's been going on in terms of what's happening with the principal. And so I share all of that to say that, yes, I am asking with the deepest level of love and commitment that we please ban this, because I've been able to thrive as a Latina Black woman, coming from this community, because Northampton poured in so much love and care into my identity and who I was, and allowed me to trust the process. And so, as many of you guys have shared, and I share the similar sentiment, you have to be able to allow people to trust, students to trust. We want them to understand that we are here to support them. And the only way I cannot say to all these folks on the call, but Northampton poured so much love and energy into who I am today, and to think for a moment that we would not ban such a hate crime, to me it's a hate crime, or a symbol of hate, would literally shatter me. When I heard of what was happening, I said, it cannot be my Northampton. This cannot be the case. And so I ask you, from a place of sincerity, a place of experience, a place of knowledge, and a place of being educated. I'm now an educator, that we take this seriously. If we want more men and women to be reflective models of, I can go into the world and say I come from a community that supported and trusted who I was as a woman of color. So I ask that same thing of you. The other thing I want to make a note of on this call is that when we're thinking about how to move forward in a restorative way, let's get back to the basics. Let's invite the community in. Let's ask other people of color to be a part of the conversation. This does not have to be siloed. This does not have to be duplicative in our efforts. Let's bring other people to the conversation, because often so much of what we are doing, we are reinventing the wheel. Don't do that. You guys have beautiful neighborhoods in the city of Northampton where people are willing to share and want to share their story, and we can build together, because as a community, we're resilient. I go back to Northampton every week. My family lives there. My mother lives there. I believe in our journey. And so I say that to you guys. I'm available. I'm in Springfield. I'm 20 minutes away. I'm happy to be a part of the conversation. But please do not make this work duplicative. There's a lot of great voices and energy that are willing to jump in and help when possible. And I'm one of them. So thank you for this platform. And I hope to see us shine in our next steps forward.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you for taking the time to join us tonight and comment. And I think that's a great way to close out our public comment period. So there are no other folks who have their hands raised. So I'm going to close the public comment period, and we'll move into the main order of our business, which is the presentation by Superintendent Provost of his first view FY 2022 school budget. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Superintendent Provost.
Mayor, are we doing school committee announcements?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I skip? We didn't actually have announcements on the agenda because this was a special meeting. So I'm sorry, we did not, we generally for special meetings, we don't have those.
I guess I'd like to ask that we have them, given the unique circumstances that we're finding ourselves in right now in the time of this special meeting.
Okay. So if the committee wishes, I can allow time if there are members of the committee who would like to make statements. I'll defer to that request. Member Levy?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you making space. I want to thank everyone who spoke tonight, especially our students, to those who have reached out via email, who've stood outside of JFK in solidarity, who have taught our students about anti-racism, who have engaged with our young people in difficult conversations about harm, bias, racism, and injustice, in order to clearly articulate the notion that we as a community stand in solidarity with our most marginalized members, that we will not stand for hatred or injustice, and that we must do better. Thank you especially, Principal Caldwell. You are a model of integrity and grace, and I am so thrilled that our students can learn from your leadership. I'm worried though. Our district's ability to respond to events like this or to work proactively should not rely on one individual administrator alone. When these events happen, what's our action plan? How do we support our educators, our students, our caregivers, our community members? When incidents like this arise, our teachers of color are the ones who carry the emotional load of supporting our students of color. How are we supporting them in this additional emotional labor that they do for our district? We have responded in some really positive ways, and I thank you, Superintendent Provost, for your leadership, and to all in the district who continue to work incredibly hard. And going forward, we have to be proactive. The Confederate flag is a symbol of racism and oppression and has no place in our schools. Academic and expressive freedom is essential to creating a learning environment where all students can learn. Yet there are limits to academic and expressive freedom. Speech that is defamatory, harassing, or endangering creates an academic environment that precludes the ability to learn for our students. I ask that our policy committee, of which I'm a part, draft a statement on academic freedom that the school committee adopts that affirms that the types of speech that interfere with the safety of our community members has no place in our schools. In order to live up to a commitment to academic and expressive freedom, the district must have means to handle speech and other acts that negatively target members of our community based on their identities, lest academic and expressive freedom exist for some and not others. This includes and goes beyond banning the Confederate flag. I know I speak for my colleagues on the school committee when I say we will continue to affirm the importance of equity and inclusion in our community. However, In order to do so, I'm asking my colleagues on the school committee to join me in supporting more bold steps. We must commit to anti-bias, anti-racist or ideals that allow us to disrupt dominant power structures and white supremacy and empower our students to be powerful contributors to change. And we must make it clear that the Confederate flag and all other symbols of racism, hatred, and oppression have no place in our schools.
Thank you for that announcement, Member Levy. Appreciate it. Member Voss.
Thank you. And I'm just going to echo everything I've heard tonight. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful words, for being brave to speak out. Our amazing administrators and students and families and community members from Northampton and other communities. And Member Levy, I really appreciate your words. I'm not even going to try to repeat them, but I'm all in. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Member Voss. Is there any other announcements from members of the school committee? Okay, if not, I will turn it over to Dr. Provost. Dr. Provost?
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Annie to control the slides right now, and I will also ask the committee and public's forbearance if some of this is a little bit choppy. I've not been able to prepare for this like I normally would. Okay, so thank you, Annie. That's a good place to start. So let me begin with some historical perspective. The coronavirus put an end to the longest economic expansion in US history. When all accounts are settled, the period of expansion lasted 128 months. Since it has been more than a decade since the last financial downturn, I think we do well to remember what school finance looked like during a recessionary period. The US economy has tremendous inertia, so it'll take some time to get back on its feet. If history is a guide, we have more than one lean budget cycle ahead, so we should keep this in mind for the context of the budget discussion. I believe, if I recall correctly from the mayor's financial talk in January, the projection on the city side was about 12 to 18 months of potential disruption, which matches up closely with my own experience with downturns in schools. Unlike past economic disruptions, this one came with a significant interruption to learning. So our budgetary challenge is to engineer an educational recovery in the context of financial headwinds. Go ahead, Annie. In the presence of the pandemic, there may be some hubris in trying to predict what the future will bring, but we need to put forth some assumptions as a basis for budget planning. I want to highlight those assumptions because the soundness of this financial plan depends in large part on whether these assumptions hold up. Our assumptions for the future include the following: that by next fall, vaccination has been made widely available to school employees. 2, however, that vaccination will not mean the end of masking or other virus mitigation costs. Our best guess is that spending to mitigate COVID transmission will continue for at least a portion of next year. We are estimating a cost of $350,000 for COVID mitigation for next year. Finally, we believe that academic and social emotional recovery will be a multi-year process. And so this brings us to the guiding values and the guiding principles for this budget. We strongly feel as an alt team that we need to prioritize those who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. While we know the pandemic has impacted all students, we also know some groups have been harder hit. As you will see in a moment, one group that seems especially impacted is our youngest learners. Even before the advent of the virus, our historically underserved students, especially our English learners, were struggling to succeed. So you'll see more money in the budget for them. As an administrative team, we developed these priorities, which were drawn from the literature of several student advocacy groups, which have begun to publish recommendations for planning for learning in the wake of the pandemic. We believe our proposal will lift up these priorities, and so I just want to name them and ask you to consider the following proposals through these lenses. One, that we preserve academic and social emotional supports for historically underserved students. Two, that we leverage community and home to school partnerships to meet students' most urgent social, emotional, physical health and mental health needs. And that we provide increased time and attention to students based on their needs to significantly boost learning for students who are behind. So this next chart is somewhat hypothetical, but I'll refer to it later on. I just want to spend a minute to walk you through it. It explains why we need to be committed to a multi-year process for recovery. Based on our current mid-year screening of second graders, so we'll just take a look at that group.
I'm sorry. Apologies.
Okay. Based on our current second graders, we know that some are on grade level, some are half a year behind, some are a year behind, and some are more than a year behind. That part of this is not hypothetical. The hypothetical part is that achieving a year and a half of academic growth within a year of schooling is often selected as sort of an optimal goal that can be achieved for some learners with intensive intervention. It's a very difficult goal to meet. It's very challenging. And in reality, there are many learners who, even with strong interventions, can't make a year and a half worth of growth within a year of schooling. And so if you think of where students are right now, even if we could get every single one of them to show a year and a half worth of growth within a year of education, we would still be working on catching some of our second graders up while they're in the fifth grade. So we need to be putting forward a plan that not only surges resources in the first year of the plan, but also has some way of maintaining those services for students over the long term that they may need in order to get caught up. Which brings me to the next point, which is that in addition to the assumptions and priorities I've already reviewed, there's a basic fiscal principle that we're highly recommending, which is that recurring expenses should not be paid with one-time revenues. What this means is that new positions should not be funded through one-time revenues. As you will see, we've received many forms of recovery funding, which will help us get through the recovery process. As you will also see, some of those revenues are set to dry up over the course of the next 2 years. In fact, some of those revenues are set to dry up over the course of the next couple of months. 10 years ago, going back to that last financial downturn I was discussing, we had a very similar situation where there was a lot of stimulus funding available. During that time, many districts turned to stimulus funding to create positions, which then had to be cut when the stimulus ran out, creating unemployment obligations that left the districts much worse off than they were to begin with before they ever received the stimulus funding. So I just want to read this quote from the Texas School Boards Association. I was in central office administration at the time of the last downturn, and I can tell you that there's a reason why the Texas School Boards Association is sounding this warning for their school committees. Remember, the 2009 stimulus created the fiscal cliff of 2011 budget shortfall that ended in billions being cut from public education. Reverberations from the fall off of that cliff continue to be felt today. That was a statement that was made this summer. So if we do not use our stimulus funds wisely, we can create a scenario that actually prolongs the period of fiscal instability. And as it's not an exaggeration to say that some districts are still recovering, or were still recovering before the pandemic hit, from the decisions that resulted in the 2011 budget cliff when the last round of stimulus funds dried up. So let me talk about the stimulus funds. This is a timeline showing 7 rounds of stimulus that the district has received. As I've said, some of them are already starting to dry up. If you look at the first 3 types of stimulus funding, there's the CV Prevention Fund from the state. There's $123,000. The CV Relief Food Service, which is federal, that was $11,000. And the Remote Learning Technology Stimulus, which is $155,000. All of those funds will expire on June 30th of this year. So we can't carry any of that money forward into the next budget, into the budget we're speaking of tonight. But I'm just trying to paint the whole picture. Next, we have 2 revenue streams that are going to run out in the middle of this budget. So we need to be thinking about what we do with these streams and how we prepare for the loss of this funding that will hit in the middle of this next year's budget. So there's CARES funding of about $1.3 million, which the city provided to the schools. I just want to thank personally the mayor and city council. That money was a lifesaver. That's what got us through all the ventilation upgrades we needed to make. It purchased a ton of PPE. It helped us with remote learning technology. I don't think we would have been able to do any of what we've been able to accomplish without those funds. So there was $1.3 million of CARES funding to the city, which was then passed to the schools. Of that, we have $279,000 left. As I said, that needs to be spent, I believe, by December 30th of the upcoming year, which will be the middle of the fiscal budget we're talking about. There's also the CVRF relief grant. That's a federal grant. That was $579,000. Of that, we have remaining $469,000. That also is a stream that is going to evaporate in the middle of this budget cycle that we're talking about tonight. So then there's also been 2 rounds of ESSERS funding from the federal government. And you can see that there are 2 different timelines for the spending of that money. So we received what was known as ESSERS 1. That's $374,000. We haven't had to dip into that much at all. So we still have $349,000 of that. And that is money that will be with us for the entire course of this next budget. And actually, I think it goes all the way till September of the next year. So even a little bit into the next fiscal year. ESSERS 2 is in the second additional round of federal funding, which we just received. That's $1.5 million. And that one extends into the beginning of FY24. So that's money that we will have to help stabilize the FY23 budget and even a portion of the FY24 if we don't spend it all before that time. And so we're coming to you with a thinking about how these different funds are going to dry up, what the timing of it is, and what we can do with them to create that sustainability of additional support for students that we think we need in order to help them stage an academic recovery. Okay, so we think that it's really important to make sure that our budget recommendations are evidence-based and they're data-based. And so as we plan out what our needs for next year will be, the best measure we have are the current midwinter screening current midwinter screening that was just conducted for students. So, we did fall screening, we did winter screening, we're going to do spring screening. There's a little bit of uncertainty with that. I just want to be clear, because we have to make the budget now, and we don't know where these students are going to be in June, where it's possible that they may be better, they may be closer to grade level. It's possible that they may be farther away from grade level. And we may have to make some adjustments based on that. But the best measure we have of what our needs are going to be are the results of the current midwinter screening. And I just want to say, for sometimes people wonder, and sometimes staff even wonder, why all the testing? Why do we do this? This is why. It's not for insignificant reasons. It's to try to make sure that we have the supports in place that we can predict kids will need. The only way we can make the prediction is if we can get a good, technically sound measure of where they are right now. So let me just walk you through this, because there are going to be a couple of charts like this. I'll spend a little more time on this and a little bit less on the others. So I'm going to discuss results in terms of grade equivalence, even though there are strong reasons why we normally avoid discussing results in this way. I talked to some of the school psychologists today and said, I just want you to know I'm going to be discussing grade level equivalence, but I'm also going to give a disclaimer. There are lots of reasons why we normally wouldn't talk in this way, but because grade level equivalence have some problems with the way they're measured. However, I think they're really helpful for policy discussion, and I think they're really helpful for helping to show a snapshot of what student need may be. So this graph here shows reading achievement results of our students based on midwinter screening. The blue bar shows the number of students on grade level based on the winter screening. The pink bar shows the number of students performing a half a year to a full year below grade level, and the orange bar shows the number of students performing 1 or more years below grade level. This is where the hypothetical example becomes important. Students in the pink bars are going to need help for 1 or 2 more years in order to catch up. Students in the orange bars will need help for more than 2 years. Here's where the COVID impact on early learners really stands out. Take a look at that kindergarten graph. Take a look at that first grade graph. You can also see one of the problems of expressing achievement in terms of grade level equivalencies when you look at that kindergarten group. By definition, kindergartners can never be more than a year below their grade placement, but there's a lot of variation in that pink bar. And it's likely that when those kindergartners become first graders, that some of the students who are currently in the pink bar will show up as yellow because they're actually below kindergarten level now. There's just no way we can measure that with our current assessments. So this tells us a lot that we can use to develop recovery staffing models, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. So next, you see the same type of information for our math achievement. There are some similarities, but there are also some important differences. Again, you see a real strong input or impact rather in kindergarten and first grade. But here you see also, I think, more need showing in all the grade levels. Okay, so we also, as many commenters said tonight, need to be mindful of students' social emotional well-being, and our screening process includes a social emotional screener. So this is the SABRS. Let me just talk a little bit about this. There are 3 scales on the screener: social behavior, which includes things such as arguing, temper, and disruption; emotional behavior, which includes things such as worry, for people who are familiar with another framework, you can think of social behavior as more of externalizing behaviors and emotional behavior as more as internalizing behaviors. And then academic behavior, which really have to do with things like engagement and ability to work independently. While we don't like to see screening results indicating problems in any area, students are considered to be at risk for social emotional problems when they show elevated scores on 2 or more scales. And so on this, I would note the dramatically elevated level of emotional risk shown in students grades 6 and 7. That's the yellow bar. I would also note that these are 2 grade levels that reflect student self-screening as opposed to teacher screenings, which were done in the other grade levels. And that's just something that I think is important to point out because when we looked at the 6th and 7th data, we have teacher ratings and student ratings. I can tell you that the teacher and student ratings are spot on with social measures and with the academic measures, but there's some differences in the self-rating as opposed to the teacher rating in terms of emotional problems. And to me, that makes sense because for a teacher, and the difference is that students are rating themselves higher on emotional risk in the middle school than their teachers are. In order for teachers to be aware of the problem, it would have to be disclosed to them. These are, as I said, more internalized types of behaviors, and we're not having a lot of contact. We're not having as much contact with kids as we normally would have. So it's quite likely that they're holding a lot in. At least that's what these results suggest to me. So with all that in mind as the background for our recommendations, we are, I'm now going to talk about our proposals. We have equity-based proposals for elementary, middle, and high school. And the entire ALT team is here tonight to help talk through any of this. So moving on to elementary. What we'd like to propose is an extensive program of after-school tutoring. When we look at the actual needs as measured by the midwinter screening, it looks like we'd be looking for 9 teachers at Bridge Street, 7 teachers at Jackson Street, 8 teachers at Leeds, 7 teachers at Ryan Road. Transportation would be provided. And so you can see the costs of all those. The thought would be to do this an hour and a half a week, 3 days a week. The 3-day-a-week methodology is consistent with research on intervention. 5 days a week would be better, but there is research out there that says 3 days would be okay. The hour and a half, I'll just say, is dictated by bus schedules. There's a lot of research out there that says, 20-minute shots on a regular basis are sufficient. So we would be putting more time than is necessarily suggested by evidence-based practice, but we need to do that in order to be able to get the buses back to pick the students up on the new release schedule that we'll have next year. We also want to provide a time for teachers to come together before they leave this year to review the results of the June screening. As I said, that might be different than the results of this year's the winter screening. And we want them to have an opportunity to look at achievement levels of the students who they'll be receiving in the fall, so that they have an opportunity to plan the differentiation needs, to purchase more resources if more resources are needed, and just to start getting a sense of the range of ability that they'll see in their class when they return. So you'll see that $30,000 reflected in each of the 3 proposals, or the proposal for the 3 levels. That's because the salary for teachers for a day of common planning time is about $100,000. We don't think that there'll be 100% participation, so we're budgeting $90,000, and just roughly for this proposal, breaking it up into thirds. Although that, that number is not strictly, doesn't have to stay that way. So the cost of those things would be $224,000. And just to add another piece of evidence in support of this, our district review said that analyzing our data and providing interventions for the kids who need it are one of the best things we're doing in the district. It's helping to improve student achievement outcomes. It's decreasing reliance on special education. And that, was the opinion of an external review that that came to take a look at this. And I noticed that it looks like my bracket got a little bit dropped on this next one, so sorry about that. So the next thing we want to propose for the elementary level is increasing ESL staffing at Leeds by 0.6 FTEs. As I mentioned at the beginning when I was going through our goals, our equity goals, and making sure that we directed resources to the students most in need, we have had data, and we're talking about prior to the shutdown, not having enough support in place for English learners and not getting good achievements for English learners as a result. So that's an additional $40,000 that would be part of the elementary package. Now, in working through this with the budget and property subcommittee, one of the things that was asked is, would there even be an interest in an after-school program? So the next slide takes a look at that. So we did ask about summer school programming and after-school programming. As you can see, the results are really similar. There was a slight preference for after-school programming. There is I think a consistent group just in these two questions that were asked of about 10% who would not be able to avail themselves of any additional supports either after school or in the summer. And so we'd have to work on finding a way to get services to them. But I think we have potential here. If we can turn the maybes into yeses, then we'd be able to get to a lot of kids in need. I really think that we will be able to. You'll notice that these are just 92 responses, which might seem low to you, and it's not low. This isn't a survey that went out to all families. Again, because we're not proposing just distributing these resources across the district for anyone. We want this to be a very targeted approach to the students who need it the most, because we think that's the essence of equity. So these 92 families were contacted over the course of the vacation week by the principals and their administrative staff. And we had an opportunity to specifically say what the thought was. So this is really our target group, and I think it's a good representation. I do think we could get there with after-school programming. Another thing that was asked is, well, what about the teachers? Isn't that a lot of teachers to have after school? And it may be. And so, and I know that teaching is hard work and people are exhausted at the end of the day. But our philosophy has always been trying to keep the money in the family, so to speak. We would certainly prefer to direct compensation for providing this additional support for students to our own staff. There's also the benefit that we want them to provide tier 2 interventions that many of them have already been trained in. So there would be consistency with the overall academic program and the way that we have merged and married our intervention program with our core curriculum. We could do that with consultants, and there may be some cases where we need to bring in consultants. The expectation and the requirement would be that they would have to do the same thing. So for us, the reading intervention is LLI. It's also foundations. So we'd want anyone we bring in to use those same programs. For math, it's math recovery. So anyone we brought in would have to use math recovery. But as I said, our staff is already trained. So we have a potential on-site workforce to mobilize for this, and we want to give them the first shot at it. Also, I think it's really important that students who need this support never be placed in the position of having to choose between getting academic support they need to catch up or participating in academic enrichment activities that are offered in the elementary schools. So we want to offset the enrichment after school program activities with these 3 days. So the enrichment activities would take place on the other 2 days of the week, which would afford these students the opportunity to participate in enrichment as well as this, and would never put a student or a parent in the awful position of having to choose between a really exciting enrichment activity that their kid is motivated for or getting the help they really need in order to succeed in school. Okay. This next chart is really complex, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm afraid that it could be more confusing than anything else. But what this is called is a loading chart. It's an administrative tool. It's a way of proving, and when I say proving, it's not like I have doubters I'm trying to prove. I mean proving in the sense of like a financial proving that you have enough resources. So right now we have 4.4 FTEs of reading interventionists at the elementary school. They have a potential caseload of 115 kids. We know that exceeds the number of kids we've just identified on the winter screening needing reading help. And so we'd need they'd be able to take care of kindergarten. They'd be able to take care of about half of first grade, but we'd need additional support in grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we know how much support we'd need in each of those grades. Similarly, with the math interventionists, we've got 4 FTEs, which is a potential caseload of 112. Again, that's insufficient for the measured need of the students. They'd be able to take care of kindergarten and most of grade 1, but we would need additional after-school support for grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you can see there, those numbers there just basically next to the grade level. The higher the number is, it's the more staff you need. So that's our elementary proposal. Next, I'll talk about middle school proposal. We would, even though in general we prefer after school as opposed to summer programming, because this is going to be such a long process and there's not so much that can be achieved in the context of a summer program. We do think that calculus is a little bit different at the middle school level, because there are students who will be coming back who haven't seen their school in a long time. So again, this would be an early start summer program, not for all students, but for a very targeted group of students, for about 50 students who we anticipate may have some difficulty transitioning back. And so the idea would be essentially to start their next grade, whether it's 6, 7, or 8, in August, so that they can hit the ground running. If we think it's going to take them a little bit more time to acclimate to being back in school, we want to make sure that they can do that before the curriculum and the heavy needs of the curriculum start moving forward, so that they're better poised to be able to keep up with those demands when the school year begins. We're also proposing hiring a culture coordinator for the middle school. Now, you might be saying, doesn't that violate the rule against not using relief funding for new positions? Well, yes and no, because we propose to do this as a contracted service that shields the district from potential unemployment liability when funding for this position runs out. It essentially externalizes that unemployment liability to the agency that would be providing the service. So we have asked CES if this is something they could do. And this figure comes from our sort of initial negotiations with them. I want to be clear because I know that sometimes the use of contracted services can be tricky. This essentially would be our employee for all intents and purposes. The person's sole duty would be to serve the middle school. They wouldn't be in other schools or other districts. They would be working the full school year. They'd be working the full school day. In fact, we've put some additional time in here for working before and after school in order to sort of get up to speed and hit the ground running. And this has a couple of additional benefits. I'll be talking about those in a minute, but I want to say this now and ask you to remember it later. By creating the culture coordinator, we can close down our in-house suspension room, which I think supports the goal of equity. It certainly supports the goal of restorative practice. It supports everything we're trying to do with the new code of conduct, but there's more than that. It also helps us provide more math interventions to students, and I'll explain how that happens in more detail shortly. We also think it's really important to upgrade our middle school social studies curriculum with 2 new texts. I'm going to be talking about those in some detail. The Budget and Property Subcommittee was really concerned about using funds for recovery for this part of the proposal, although they're supportive that this work needs to be done. And so you'll see that this says finance from relief / FY21 budget. Our plan is to pay the $91,000 for the history text from this year's budget, but we did want to show it because it will be new for next year, and it'll be it's part of the overall equity focused package. But I did want to point out that that's coming from this year's money. And you might say, well, how are you doing that? This wasn't in the budget for the current year, and that's a lot of money. And I'll just point out for people who may not talk about school budgets all the time, a school budget is always at best a guess. You never have it to the penny in any of your line items, and you certainly never have it to the penny overall. And this year, there were lots of variances. We put a lot of money in for transportation costs that weren't realized because we weren't busing kids for a large portion of the year. We put money in for utilities costs that weren't realized because we weren't using the same amount of electricity and heating when schools were didn't have very few staff in them. So some of those variances look like they'll be to the good, and our plan is to use FY21 budget money for those specific costs. We are also recommending an Amplify Science curriculum pilot. We know that the science department has been working really hard on bringing their curriculum to the next level. And, because we don't have a good steady source of curriculum improvement funding within our budget, we've often relied on one-time funds to make leaps forward. So I think it's consistent with our past budgeting practices to use some amount of relief funding to help support that pilot. Again, there's the data team workshop for middle school staff, and then SEI training for all staff. Sorry for the alphabet soup there. That's sheltered English immersion. For the public, you should know that in order to be licensed as a teacher or an administrator in Massachusetts, you need to be certified in sheltered English immersion. It's a process for helping non-native English speakers succeed in the general education classroom. And it's one of the things that we identify as a real professional development need, an equity-based professional development need for middle school staff. I'll say it again, I've said many times, the group that we've identified is really needing support and really needing to be held up by this budget is our English learners. And a lot of the work, in fact, the majority of the work done with English learners isn't done by ESL staff alone. It's done by the general education staff because students are in general ed classrooms for increasing periods of the time as their English skills improve. But it's a long process. There are 6 levels. I'll be talking about the different levels later on. And students typically begin to develop strong conversational English long before they develop strong academic English skills. And so they need to have teachers who are really attuned to the things that can be done to help English learners succeed in the general education classroom. And it's been a while since everyone had their SEI training. So this is just a refresher. This is a cost of a refresher SEI training we'd like to provide for middle school staff. So you can see the overall cost of the middle school proposal is $232,000, $232,006. Okay, moving on to what I wanted to explain about the benefit, like sort of the add-on benefit of the culture coordinator position. So this is another loading chart. At the middle school right now, we have 1.8 FTEs of reading interventionists. That's a potential caseload of 100. When we look at our measured need based on the winter screening, it's sufficient. It can cover students grades 6 through 8, so we don't see a need to add additional intervention staff there. When we look at our math, that's where we have a problem. There's currently 1 FTE. I think it's a potential caseload of about 50 students. It's a little hard to tell. As you may remember, our math intervention program, Power Math, was actually one of the last presentations that this committee saw before the COVID shutdown. But that was only a half a year old. So we're making some projections based on the half year of experience we have. We think we're going to run out. We think that the 1 math interventionist we have right now can cover 7th and 8th grade, but would be completely used up covering 7th and 8th grade. So we need another math interventionist to support the 6th grade student. And this is where sort of the twofer of the culture coach comes in. If we bring in a culture coach and we close the in-house suspension room, that then frees our in-house suspension teacher to become another math interventionist. And it just so happens that the teacher we currently have running in-house suspension happens to be a very skilled math teacher. And so we think it's putting his skills to a higher use to use him as an additional math interventionist. And we think it's better supporting students at the middle school by transforming that position to math interventionist. Okay, so next I'll talk a little bit about those recommended changes in curriculum. So this is from the middle school history department. And I'll just say, we felt that getting a text that shows African and indigenous civilizations pre-existed colonial contact was critical even before this week. And everything that's been happening at JFK this week and everything that's been said at the beginning of this meeting makes this, just foundational. This is essential. Now, this isn't to say that our teachers don't teach that, don't teach the history of Africa before colonization or the history of Americas before colonization, but their text doesn't support them to do that. So they're pulling in a lot of resources. So they've asked for a text that would make that easier for them. And I think that's a request that needs to be honored. If you could go ahead, Annie. Speaking a little bit about honoring teachers and increasing equity. We have a very extensive rubric that we ask teachers to fill out as they evaluate texts. So I'm just showing the equity portion of that, since we are framing this budget all around issues of equity. And so you can see that the first textbook scored very well in the equity rubric as measured by their teachers, and you can see who the raters were at the bottom of the screen. Next, talk about the geography text. This slide, like the former one, is taken from the history department's own presentation on this, so I'll make sure they get proper attribution. And so here you can see it, our teachers calling out the stereotyping of persons of color on the cover of our current geography text. They want to provide a better, safer, more affirming school for their kids. And so I think we have to support that. Next, we can see how this book does on equity. Here it's the top score all the way down the line. Again, it's the same teachers. And again, teachers are asking for support, and I really want to support them on this. So next, we'll move to the high school. So our equity-focused recovery activities for the high school emphasize giving more students access to advanced classes by expanding our dual enrollment program. You may recall this slide with the 3 bars from my January superintendent's report showing a potential decreased interest in post-secondary education as one consequence of the pandemic. My hope is that expanding our dual enrollment options for students will help jumpstart renewed interest in post-secondary education, as well as providing more equitable access to advanced classes for students while they're still in the high school. So there's an additional piece to this. So there's $40,000 for the tuitions for dual enrollment. That I think should be financed from relief funds. We can do that without creating any potential financial risk. We also want to increase counselor capacity at the high school by adding an additional half-time position to the counseling staff. So, we can't make significant increases in dual enrollment without providing sufficient staffing for the counselors to help students identify the courses they need and get signed up for them. This will be, for many students, their first time taking dual enrollment, and so they're going to need a lot of support. And, we have heard, this committee has heard, I've heard from counselors about their frustrations not getting to provide the direct services to kids that they want to because of the workload. So adding this additional task, we think it's only fair to add additional staffing. So that is financed with reallocations from other parts of the budget. I want to talk about one specific reallocation because I just want to be completely transparent. It may be one that could generate more discussion tonight. One of the ways that we create that is by making or free up financing for that is by reducing one of the classrooms at Leeds. We currently have 3 sections or 2 sections of kindergarten that would be moving into 3 sections of first grade. So there's an opportunity to do a reduction there to create the funding that we need in order to support this position and other positions in the budget. It would not involve any kind of a layoff. So I just want to be really clear. I don't want anyone to worry about reduction or their job. There's always a lot of turnover in every summer. We're hiring, between, I would say 40 and 80 positions just to restaff current within the district. And so this wouldn't be a reduction that results in a layoff. And the 4 ESPs are really coming from one cost center to the next. So some of these ESPs are coming from middle school. Some of the ESPs are coming from other places. One of the reasons why is there's a large group of students with disabilities moving up from the middle school into the high school that's being replaced on 6th grade by a lower number of students with disabilities requiring one-to-one services. So that's really an adjustment within the budget, but I want to talk about what it means by financing from reallocations with other parts of the budget. So then you can see that there's, again, another $30,000 for data team workshop, and the addition of a 0.3 ESL position at the high school. This we want to finance with school choice funds, again, because we want this to be permanent. We want it to be based on a recurring source of revenue. And so that's our recommendation there. I want to say that there's some economic challenge in higher education, which is resulting in an opportunity to leverage funding for dual enrollment programs at this time. Even before the pandemic, we were all reading about a lot of colleges and universities that were struggling. We were reading about a lot of colleges and universities that were closing their doors. And they have been hard hit by this. If you sort of think back to the last slide where I'm showing decreasing enrollment from, or interest at least in our current seniors in participating in post-secondary education, that means the post-secondary institutions are thinking about what that's going to mean for their finances. And so they are very motivated right now to try to work with high schools in order to open up new markets. So at Holyoke Community College, there's currently a buy two, get two free deal. At Westfield State University, there's a buy one, get one free deal. And as we've thought about this and really reaching the goal of making sure that we can expand opportunities to higher level coursework to a broader group of students, we are being very intentional in the courses that we'd like to purchase with this money, and trying to reach out with courses that we think would be appealing to some of the students who we want to help get more interested in post-secondary education. So we'd like to add understanding diversity and valuing similarities, Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, intro to Latinx studies, and then we'd also, from Westfield State, introduction to comparative ethnic studies. And then we'd like to also provide some courses that have high transferability. I should say all of these belong to mass transfer, which means these credits count towards the core at any state college or university. So another add-on benefit to this is not only would we be getting courses at a low cost that would allow us to pursue our equity goals within the high school, but we'd be giving students a head start for post-secondary education by letting them take some credits out of high school that would be highly transferable within the state. So that's the proposal for the high school. I want to talk a little bit, since we discussed ESL a couple of times tonight, where we get our evidence that more ESL staff is needed. And so this is just one part of a much larger document that talks about the can-do descriptors and service level recommendations that students have based on their WIDA scores. WIDA is the assessment that Access is the assessment that we give for ELs. WIDA translates into WIDA scores, and there's 6 levels going all the way from entering to reaching. You can see as students progress from level 1 to level 6, the language tasks they can be expected to complete become more complex. And the level of pull-out support they require becomes less intense. But for students in overall WIDA levels 1 to 2.5, there's a recommendation of not less than 45 minutes per day of direct ESL instruction. And then you can see that recommendation is less for WIDA levels 2.5 to 3.5 and less again for 3.5 to 4.2. And then in 4.2 to 6, The students are no longer classified as ELs and should participate in the general classroom alongside fluent native English-speaking peers. So based on that and based on our access scores, we can do loading charts. We can do loading charts to see what the staffing needs are and where our shortcomings are, which is what the next slide shows. And what the slide shows is that we have two areas of significant deficiency of staffing. The first is ESL, the first is leads. So this shows our students, their grade level and their WIDA levels. And so you can just multiply the number of students at each WIDA level by the number of minutes recommended for the WIDA level, and then divide that by the number of minutes in a teacher's work week to know whether or not you have enough staff. So at ESL, we're showing that there's a deficit of over 1,000 minutes of instructional time that can't be met with the current staffing, which is why we recommend the increase of ESL staffing for leads. And at the high school, we have a smaller deficit. The deficit there is about 300 minutes, which is why we're recommending a smaller increase in staffing for the high school. So just to wrap a few more things up, I want to talk about the projected use of funds. This goes back to the original discussion of making sure the funding can last as long as it needs to last. This shows our current burn rate on relief funds and where we'd like to take it, where we recommend taking it over the course of the next few budget cycles. So this year we received about, when all said and done, $4 million worth of relief funds and spent about $1.5 million. So that'll leave us with roughly $250,000 worth of relief funds next year. Our budget, when we put it all together, would have us spending about $1.5 million of relief next year. And so that would still leave us with about $1 million of relief funds for FY23 to help stabilize that budget. Hopefully by FY24, we're back in rosier economic times and we can shift from so much reliance on relief funds to regular sources of funding, which takes me to the next piece, which is what the regular side of the budget. This is what we also call the appropriation. So the appropriation right now is just over $32 million. One of the first things we do is try to project what we think a level service budget would be. Level service is basically just maintaining the current level of services you need with any increases in contracts that are locked in. So you can see to maintain our services, we would need an increase of about 3.93%. However, that's not the amount we're asking for. We're asking for a little bit more than that. We're actually asking for 4.4%, which is only possible. You know, I didn't even come to the community asking for this because of the proposition at 2.5 override passing and kicking in. You know, I'll just share personally, I was pleasantly shocked by the mayor's January city budget proposal. I expected things to be much more dire, but so much good was done by getting that Proposition 2.5 override and by delaying its implementation. So I think this is a reasonable request. I think it's a request that will allow us to meet the needs of our kids. You know, when we come back, if you support this with a fully formed budget book in early March, there might be a little bit, slight shifting, but this is the basic number we're looking for if you can get behind this. And so I've been talking for a long time and I apologize for that. I do want to say that all members of the ALT team are here tonight and can help answer questions about any parts of this budget proposal. And so if it's possible for them just to be recognized to help me respond to the committee members' questions. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, John. Dr. Provost, we have a hand from Vice Chair Kaufman, Member Kaufman.
Thank you. I mean, I had some general questions. Were you going to take this somewhere else, Mayor Narkowitz, or were you going to open it up now?
I was going to try to allow if there was public comment, but I think it's fair if we want to have some initial reactions or questions from the school committee first, and then we can go to public comment after that, if there is anyone who wishes to make public comment. So.
Sure. I think I have questions just for clarity, so that might be helpful in both ways. Okay, great. First, Dr. Provost, thank you so much for this. You know, I've been a real concerned person about recovery and what we're going to do, and it almost seems like everything has gotten so day to day in terms of how we're going to deal with the situation that we haven't thought about how to get out of it per se. So I might very much appreciate your focus. So let me just ask you some questions just for clarity's sake at this point, if that's okay. And if you don't know, that's fine. Just to say, I'll get back to you.
Sure.
When you say that you're going to determine need of kids, and I obviously you understand the pros and cons of what we currently have, but how would you determine need in the future, do you think, of kids that would qualify for after school or whatever? How open would that be, and what kind of determinants might go into that equation?
Sure. Thank you for the question. That's why I said, you know, we're making the budget now based on winter data, but there's another round of screening that takes place in the spring. So it's our best guess, but we may be off. You know, the spring screening may show more need, may show less need, but we would use that as our best indicator of need, planning for the spring, for the fall. We'd make adjustments based on that. And then there'd be another screening in the fall, which might identify other kids or might identify that some kids we thought needed help don't need help. So that screening, I guess what I'm saying, is an ongoing process, and we keep looking at it, and we keep trying to identify kids and make sure that none of them fall through the cracks.
Thank you for that. And clearly there's going to be some kids that just aren't good test takers or just not going to know. So you'll also, if this goes through, you would be relying, I assume, on teachers and teachers' conversations with parents about whether their students would benefit from participation?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been clear from the beginning that we have a multi-measured system. We don't rely on any single assessment, and we always use professional judgment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying that. So you might have mentioned this. If so, I apologize. But why would it begin? This sounds like the recovery would begin in the fall rather than the summer, or did I mishear that? I guess the question is, could it potentially begin in the summer? Would that be beneficial and possible?
I think that, well, one thing, we can't compete with our own summer program. So I want to be clear, there is a lot of summer services that happens in the district. We have a very extensive special education summer program that runs in August, several hundred kids, scores of faculty. And so they won't be available. Any summer programming we could do would be in the month of August. And so we are recommending that a little bit for the middle school. But for elementary, I think staff is going to need a little bit of a break. I think kids are going to need a little bit of a break. And this is long term. So, 2 more weeks on what may be a 3-year recovery trajectory isn't going to make much of a difference.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Can you share just real quickly who has been involved in this so far and what their response has been to your proposal? Sure.
So we have been working on this really since the morning before the State of the City financial budget report. It's been the alt team. I think we're up to 3 or 4 full days of budget workshop to present all this. Obviously, there's a lot of input from teachers that was brought forward by the administrators. You can see teachers' names are listed at the bottom of some of these proposals. And so the next piece has been the work with the Budget and Property Subcommittee. This has gone through 3 iterations based on feedback from the Budget and Property Subcommittee. Those were public meetings. I want to give a shout out to the student union for attending. I think for the first time in budget and property history. I will say that the input from the student was really more of an appreciation of the whole process than, sort of feedback on the ideas. And the last meeting was also attended by the president of the union. And so we had an opportunity for some discussion with the president of the union.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Two more quick questions. This obviously doesn't include any potential new funds that might be coming from the feds or the state. Is that right? Because certainly there's been some talk, I think up to $25 billion within one of the federal proposals that would funnel down to the states. Is it possible in your mind, or Mayor Narkowitz, that some of that might be coming to the schools?
That's two questions. So I'll answer the first one. Yes, it's correct that we're not putting any speculative funding in here. We're only counting the funds that we know have already been awarded.
Okay. All right. Forget my second question. You don't know the answer to this, do you, Mayor?
Well, I mean, there's definitely, funding that's on the table right now as part of President Biden's, more than $1 trillion recovery package that would include funds going to cities based on CDBG eligibility, et cetera. But that's, again, that's all somewhat speculative, and it would be money that's focused on recovery. So it's unclear what it would be used for or could be used for. And again, as the superintendent said, it would be one-time money. So we'd have to be very strategic in how we applied it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And my last question, I had emailed you earlier, Dr. Provost, but you probably didn't get it yet. But you had posted the recovery needs of kids by grade level earlier, the 3 slides. And I'm just wondering, because some of those actually don't look nearly as concerning as I thought they would be. And I realize it is what it is, but how does that compare to previous years? Do you have any idea whether certain grade levels that, it looks like a substantial, very high percentage of kids are on grade level, whatever that means, is that, how similar or dissimilar do you know offhand that this might be to other grades, or if any principals might know that?
So the thing that stands out to me is if you look at our measured math need in first grade right now, we have more students who we feel are at least 5 months behind than we feel are on grade level. I've never seen that before. It's always been the majority of kids are on grade level, some are above and some are below. So that's an astounding finding for me. Also, the kindergarten, it's about an even split. That's also something I've never seen before. So that is, I can tell you for a fact, that's much different than in prior years or than anything I've ever seen anywhere.
Right, and I would have predicted that almost across the board. So it's one measure. It's very exciting to see that we might not be in as much as a whole as we thought, but again, we don't know yet. But from the other ones, if we had done this in the past, and I know we've done this in the past, don't you always find a few students within each grade that are 1 year or more than 1 year behind? Or is that unusual in and of itself?
No, you always find some that are more than a year behind.
Yeah.
Or within a half a year to a year as well. The whole spectrum.
Yeah. All right. Again, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
Okay, member Seraphy Cox, you have your hand up next.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, Mayor. Are we doing public comment before or after school committee? I just wasn't sure what we were doing.
I was going to offer that opportunity. I didn't say I didn't preclude people.
I would be fine with you offering it now if that feels appropriate to you.
Okay, I can certainly do that if other members are okay with that. So I guess I would open up to the members of the public. If there are any members of the public that wanted to add any comments at this point. I know you just got the presentation like we did, but I felt that it would be challenging to offer comments at the beginning of the meeting on the budget that you hadn't seen yet. So if there's any members of the public that wish to offer any comment, you could raise your hands. Okay, well, We'll obviously have other meetings, public meetings on the budget, so there will be other opportunities. I don't see anyone taking advantage of that, so I think you're safe to continue, Member Seraphy Cox.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Member Kaufman, I did have the same question about. I definitely see the deficits in the kindergarten and first grade that Superintendent Provost you were talking about, but I was surprised to see that not reflected as much in the upper elementary grades. Of course, this is assuming that those tests are accurate and reliable, and so. You know, I'll be interested to see as we move forward if that continues to be reflected. But at least I echo Member Kaufman's surprise on that one. I had a couple questions. One is on one of the last slides when you were talking about like the general budget increases and decreases. There was a pretty significant decrease for special education tuition. Can you talk about what that is, and is that a result of our recent investments in SPED supports within the district?
Yes, it's a combination of things. It's all of the work we've done with inclusion. It's all the program building that we've done, especially at the high school level. And there's also some students who are changing needs due to their age. But if, you know, I guess I'll just thank you for that question and use it as an opportunity to offer some praise for our special education department. They have been so dedicated to including students with disabilities in all aspects of our school environment. And one of the benefits of that, in fact, one of the ways that we've financed so much that we've been able to do over the past several years is through including kids, which is not only the morally right thing to do, but is also the more efficient way to educate students.
Okay. And do you have specific thoughts on like those savings that are now happening? Are those in being reinvested into the special education department, or are they just kind of going into the general pot?
In prior years, almost all of the special education tuition funding savings went into special education tuition and special education positions and programs within the district. In this case, I would say that some of it is going into ESPs, which would be dedicated to special ed, but some of it is going into other parts of the overall budget as well.
Okay. And then when I, on that same graph where you were showing kind of what the disparities are between the grades, and you pointed out the social and emotional disparities in 7th and 8th grade, I was expecting, I think, to see a lot of things then for the middle school to address that. And I'm wondering, maybe I missed what, you know, significant investments you were planning there, but can you talk a bit more about how your middle school plan addresses those needs?
Sure. One thing that I want to point out is there's a strong counseling department in place at the middle school already. So I think we're a little bit ahead of the game there, as opposed to, say, the counseling resources that are available in the elementary schools, where it's one counselor and one psychologist. But another piece of this that I think is going to be really big is the culture coordinator. And that really has been a position that was Desmond's vision. And so if it's okay, and he doesn't mind talking, I'd invite him to speak about that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I don't know what culture coordinator means, so I would be very interested to learn more.
All right. Hello, everyone. So the culture coordinator is someone who will a lot of holes. One, this is I'll say a teacher level position. So this is not a position where they would have the authority to suspend a student or anything like that, but would likely be the first person who would have contact with the student who was having a difficult time. So perhaps needed to step out of the classroom and process, and then get back into the classroom versus become so dysregulated that they needed, an extended time away from the classroom. This is a position, this is not to be confused with an adjustment counselor who has a regular schedule interacting with students who require that interaction as part of a plan, whether it's an IEP, 504, whatever, what have you. The culture coordinator would also oversee like our PBIS program. The culture coordinator would be someone who is in a position, has knowledge in providing professional development to staff in various areas. Forgive me, I just ran back from tucking my son in. So the
no worries.
I'd love to, sort of share the job description. But this position would be the individual that students would interact with before they ever got to a position where they needed to interact with one of the associate principals or myself. And so this, providing that sort of buffer. I thought it was really important, and you didn't ask this, but I'm gonna say this. I thought it was really important because something that has been very difficult for me to hear is within the community, the letters JFK standing for Jail for Kids. And that is that is a perception amongst folks who have gone through JFK. And so this idea, if you were had any part of my interview process, that the school to prison pipeline will be broken in any school that I'm associated with. I can't have it. And so this idea that I'm having a rough time, so someone who could suspend me is the next person that I see, is difficult for me. And I know it's difficult for students and is dysregulating when I just need a break, but this is the person who's showing up. It also creates an environment where the associate principal who shows up or the principal who shows up has to choose between, do I need to immediately be the nice person and make the teacher the bad guy or the bad person, excuse me, or do I show up and I'm the authority figure and I'm, and so there's, I want to break that traditional relationship that exists and create a relationship where everyone gets to know everyone and we are able to just be a community. And sometimes we get dysregulated and sometimes we need just a few minutes to like pull it together and come back. And sometimes we need additional supports. And an associate principal, a principal who is supposed to be in the classrooms, who is supposed to be coaching teachers and who is supposed to be providing feedback and doing all those things. When you're constantly pulled away for those other things and looking at the numbers of referrals and looking at the numbers of suspensions and looking at who is getting those referrals and who is getting those suspensions. I don't think I need to detail that. This position seemed like it was the move to make, especially if we get the right person who is trauma informed, who can provide trauma informed PD to staff, it just seems like that's the move to make. So, sorry if that was really long-winded.
No, that was so incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, and thank you, Superintendent Provost, for asking Principal Caldwell to elaborate on that. As you may know, I was incredibly supportive of the removal of the school resource officer from our schools, and I think that the introduction of resources like this in part in place of resources like that is a part of how we start to address these things. So I really applaud that, and I also would love to kind of hear when we are talking about the high school, how are we addressing those same issues at the high school, because it doesn't stop when you graduate from 8th grade. But thank you so much. I was about to call you Professor Caldwell, Principal Caldwell.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are you all set, Member Seraphy Cox?
I might think of more questions, but those are it for now. Thanks.
That's fine. I just didn't want to move on unless you were.
Yes, thank you.
I'm just going to note for the record that Member Gold is having some raise hand function issues, so I'll be calling on him at some point here, but is unable to get his hand to raise. Member Levy, you have your hand up next.
Thank you. Thanks, Principal Caldwell, because I also had a question about the culture coordinator and you more than answered it. So I really appreciate that. If you are able to share that job description, I'm not sure if it's done, but if you can share that when it is, I'd really appreciate getting a better sense of it, even more so. One question I do have about the culture coordinator is whether there's any restorative practices piece to that position.
Restorative practices is, the way I see it, it's not that person. Restorative practices is the umbrella that covers the entire building, and that is how we should operate. But yes, that, the idea would be that person would be skilled in restorative practices, and again, could provide some level of professional development to leadership, also to staff within the building.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
So Superintendent Provost, thank you for the presentation. I know there are a tremendous number of hours that go into this from you, from your administrative team, from the budget and property subcommittee. So thank you for all of the work that went into this. I am having trouble understanding what in the budget is coming from relief funds and what is coming from the regular budget. And there were some slides where it was really clear, and then other slides where I couldn't quite tell. I wonder, is that something that you could, not right now, but break down for us and show us visually at some point, like for the next meeting or before the next meeting?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we actually identified that as a potential problem with this presentation earlier today, because at some point we're combining different things and at other points we're breaking them out. But we wanted to limit the number of slides, but definitely we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things I'm wondering about is it seems like you are thinking ahead about ways to use the federal funds. And I wonder, have you included in your calculations spending on creative solutions for getting more students back in person this spring that are going to cost money, things like tents that we discussed earlier, things that I don't know what creative solutions you all are coming up with, but is that included when you look at how we're using the federal funds?
Well, it wouldn't be included in this because this is from July 1st moving forward. We are thinking about using relief funds to try to increase the number of students in schools and provide tents for the spring. So the only way that it shows up, it's something you don't see because the money will have already been spent.
Right. I just want to know, like, were you accounting for that when you were looking at how much is available for FY22?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. I promise I'm not asking this because I have a current kindergartner at Leeds who will be a first grader next year at Leeds, but I'm concerned about two things about potentially losing a first grade teacher at Leeds. One is that the numbers for number of kindergarten students who are below grade level are so high that it seems like, is this the time to not have an additional first grade class? The other is, I wonder if you have a sense of registration numbers for the fall already. My understanding is there are a number of families who didn't enroll this year because of the pandemic and the nature of schooling. We talked a lot in the fall about the decrease in enrollment. And my understanding is that hopefully those numbers are going back up once we're sort of open and running more closer to normal in the fall. And I wonder if you're taking that into account when you're projecting your numbers.
We are, it wouldn't have an impact on that class that, we believe we can reduce. Where we think that we might see an impact is in kindergarten, but we're maintaining the same number of kindergarten grades. I have to say that is a huge question mark for me right now, because what we're hearing from families is we don't know if we can register because we can't register until we know that you're committed to being back full time in the fall. So there's some uncertainty about that number, but not as much uncertainty about the other grades, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, Principal Wenz looks like she has a hand up.
Principal Wenz.
I just wanted to say good evening, everyone. Currently, we only have 34 kindergartners moving into first grade. We currently only have one homeschooled, and we have 2 listed in private school. I know that doesn't account for the number that didn't enroll, but it does leave us a few spots, like not just a few, but it leaves us many spots for first grade. It's not as tight as it could be, but it is a concern. So.
Got it. Hearing those numbers is really, really helpful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things I am wondering, and again, maybe I was misunderstanding some of the presentation. I really, really appreciate, as Member Kaufman already articulated, the focus on really catching students up and ensuring that the budget is geared towards that. I didn't quite get the sense that there was a whole lot of that at the middle school. And I just want to clarify, I think I heard you say that it's not as needed at the middle school. There are counselors at the middle school, but I guess I'm thinking about the academic learning loss and the need to recover there. That it seems like what I'm seeing in the budget isn't as concerned about that at the middle school. Am I reading it accurately?
Not quite. That we're not as concerned about reading, catching kids up in reading in the middle school, because we're not seeing the same deficits in reading skills. And we already have a number of reading interventionists on staff at the middle school. So we think that there's sufficient staffing there. Where we do see a need, and we are requesting additional staffing at the middle school, is for math. That gets kind of obscured in this whole thing because it's related to the culture coordinator. By hiring the culture coordinator, we eliminate the in-house room, but we keep the position, we keep the teacher, and turn that teacher into a second math interventionist. And that's how we get the help kids need to catch up in math.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think this is my last question for right now. The HCC and the Westfield State courses, are those online courses? Are they in person?
They would either be offered online or on campus. So transportation wouldn't be a barrier for kids. When I say on campus, I mean on our campus.
And
Right.
taught by professors and instructors from those institutions?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Is there, for the courses that are online courses, is there academic support for those students who might need to ask questions or get help in ways that maybe now they're more used to online learning, but perhaps who aren't accustomed to online learning and who are taking college level courses sometimes for the first time?
If I can phone a friend on that one, I'd invite Megan or Lori to speak to that because they have really invested a lot of time in this part of the proposal.
Yes, there are wraparound supports provided by the universities for the students that would be taking online classes. There'd be synchronous and asynchronous times depending upon what we decide for the courses.
Great. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Member Condon, you have your hand up next.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dr. Provost and your team for this first look at the budget. Most of my questions have already been addressed, but I do want to just confirm in relation to the after-school tutoring and the early start programming at the middle school, would all transportation be covered for those two programs so any students interested in participating would have access?
Yes, in fact, that's why it's an hour and a half after school. We have to get the buses cycled back to the school.
And the same thing for the early start summer program?
Correct.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Member Goldman, you have your hand up next.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank everyone for their contributions to this budget. There's so many moving pieces, and it's so hard to predict what we have ahead of us. I have a number of questions, but hopefully they require short answers, and some of them I will email to you because they're quite intricate, but the ones that are simple might be helpful for others to hear. My first question is on the first slide, you're making your assumptions. Can you confirm that there's an assumption that all students and staff will be in person?
Yes.
Okay, and can you?
Well, let me take that back. I believe that there are families that are still going to say, I'm not comfortable coming to school. And I don't know what the policy environment for that is going to be. So I expect it will be less than fully enrolled, but I expect that we will have our staff back. I'm hoping we get vaccination in the very near future and that really makes a difference and allows that to happen for us next year.
Can you give an estimate for this day on conversations you're having with the state or with other superintendents, with the district, a little bit about the opening process? I'm asking because I think it is relevant to learning loss and having a sense of what fall looks like. The sooner we can start moving in that direction, knowing that there's always the possibility that we'll have to back off again. And I'm in favor of slow and simple to kind of move forward. I appreciate that your budget reflects that.
I'm not sure I follow what you mean by the opening process.
Well, are you expecting full enrollment in person this summer for the summer programs or at any point in the summer?
Oh, yes. So our summer programs ran even last year, even in July, we had a special education summer program. So, and those, even though that was with a smaller number of students than typically attends the summer program, all the students who would attend the summer program have been included in that group that was in person from the very beginning of our remote days. So I do expect that our summer program will be fully staffed and fully enrolled as it typically would be.
And then any ideas about increasing in person this spring?
So that is the hottest of potatoes right now, as I'm sure you know. So we're going to find out.
I'm asked. So it's a question that I'm asked, so I'm passing the buck.
Yeah. So I think the next piece of this puzzle is vaccination. I really don't see a way around that. I think that once teachers are vaccinated, then we can begin thinking about the next step of the process. I mean, the other piece, though, really is social distancing, and when it's going to be felt that that actually is safe to go to less than 6 feet. I really don't have a prediction on that. You know, the state, to answer your question directly, what's the conversation with the state? The state's saying it should be 3 feet. They've been saying that all along, but you know, that's guidance that we have not had a lot of confidence in.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. When you were talking about the budget priorities for students disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, including youngest learners and English language learners, one of the points was about leveraging community and home to school partnerships. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. I didn't see much of that in the body of the presentation.
Yes, so I haven't been able to turn the final corner on this, which is why I haven't spoken about this much. But we do have a portion of stimulus funding that we want to dedicate towards connecting students with mental health services within the community. I have had some conversations with CSO staff. As you may know, we have a relationship with CSO at the high school, and I'd like to try to expand upon that because, again, that's a way, this may be more of an acute need than a chronic need. And again, that's a good use of one-time funds because we could, if we can pay for services that are available within the community, but that people may just not have the funds or ability to access, then that would be an example of leveraging partnerships within the community.
Okay, thank you. I'll email you some more on that. Sorry, many of my questions were answered, so I'm trying to just skip over those. You are promoting after-school tutoring for the elementary grades. Can you speak a little bit about and talking about how that's for the target population? Can you discuss a little bit some other options that were considered and why they were passed on?
So I think it's really important to clarify that what we're really talking about is tier 2 services after school because, you know, tier 2 is strongly evidence-based. After school tutoring is kind of iffy. So it's just a matter of when they're getting their tier 2 service. So the other thing that we discussed was providing the tier 2 within the day. The reason that we were at a stuck place on that is if we do it within the day, then we can't have our own staff available. It forces us to go into contracted services, which is problematic because it's taking money away from our staff. It's working with people who may not know our programs as well as we do. It's working with people who definitely don't know the kids as well as the teachers do. And that's the situation there. The other thing during the day would be increasing the number of interventionists, right? So we would, to do like a comparable thing to what we could do after school, we'd need at least 8 additional interventionists. And to get that out of the budget, it means we'd have to make 8 reductions somewhere else. And that would be just blasting classroom sizes through the roof, which would completely undo anything that we had accomplished by creating the additional interventionist staff within the day.
That makes sense. Thank you. And then can you speak to, I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there wasn't a scope of recovery needs slide for the high school?
No, you're not wrong. The standardized testing that we've been doing is grades K through 8. At the high school, it's not the same type of testing. What we're really looking at is end of course. And when we look at where the inequities are at the high school, it's not as much a situation of students falling behind with the current curriculum, because the curriculum is much more diverse at the high school. The way the inequity expresses itself at the high school is students don't get access to all the learning opportunities at the high school. And so that's why we are focusing on this strategy of dual enrollment. We think that there may be some barriers that prevent kids from accessing Smith College classes. There may be some barriers that prevent them from accessing AP classes. But I think with well-selected dual enrollment courses offered in a way that is conducive to students' needs and is convenient for them, we can address getting them access to higher level classes.
Thank you. My next question is regarding the social and emotional support for the high school students. I know you've included hiring a counselor to help with the workload for the remarkable amount of work and expertise of the guidance counselors at the high school, bringing someone else. Do you think that that's adequate to provide that social emotional support, or can you talk a little bit about what you have in place for that?
So I have to say that is another question mark and a blind spot. You know, one of the things that I pushed for was making sure that we had screening across the board. At this point, we don't have high school data, which is why I can't make the same kind of predictions about what the need at the high school might be. So like I said, we still have until spring. We may still be able to get some data, which would be able to enable me to give you an evidence-based answer to that question. But the only honest answer I can give you right now is we don't have the need, and we don't have the data that would allow us to make meaningful inferences about the potential need at the high school right now.
Okay, and my last question is, if there's any budget for supporting families with childcare, particularly in light of the change in schedule for families.
So there's nothing for that specifically in this budget. I will say that one of the things we discussed as a potential benefit of after-school tutoring, at least for the students who are eligible, is it would help to mitigate that cost. I have to say I don't have any experience in school budgeting and the use of school funds for after-school care. I do have experience with our CPPI grant and trying to expand preschool care and get students into preschool programs that run longer hours so that in effect it takes care of the childcare need. But I really don't have a lot of experience with like sort of direct payments from districts to families for childcare. I can't answer that question.
Yeah, I have concerns about how many preschools and childcare facilities have closed in the area. It's another thing to start advocating for or continue after this past year. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Gold actually has had his hand up, or at least he informed me he's had his hand up, but he can't raise it. So he would be the next person in the order that I'm keeping. So I'm going to go to Member Gold. I'm then going to go to Member Fallon because she has not asked a first question yet, and then I'll come back to you, Member Levy, afterwards, just so that every member has at least one chance to speak first. So go ahead, Member Gold.
Thanks, and sorry for the technical difficulties. So I thank you for all the work in the presentation and to everyone who put the time into it. It was a question that I raised during as a member of the Budget and Property Subcommittee, Dr. Provost, and maybe if the K through 8 administrators or all team members want to chime in, was a concern specifically at K to 5, but that the primary relief funds were primarily being used in after school and not providing it during the day when you do have that captive audience and you do have the ability to exponentially impact your use of intervention, because then it relieves the teacher of a lot of the relieves the teacher of that work, right? Like when you have the interventionist working during the day, it reduces the teacher's class size, it minimizes their focus, sort of along the lines of what Member Goldman was talking about with other options. I can understand the thinking in some ways on having someone who doesn't know the students and versus someone who does, working with them after school. At the same time, the benefit of having someone during the day seems to far outweigh that, you know, knowing the kid thing, right? Like if we have trained experts in intervention in a not a consultant, but a contract work where we don't have the unemployment issues. And so I would just like to know, like, hear more about the consideration about that. I mean, and whether or not it's worth exploring those options. Specifically, I do know that the district's intervention program and math recovery beginning this April is actually offering that a brand new service just like that, where you have trained math recovery specialists that can work with students during the day. And so I would just love to hear some more about that so I can feel more confident in that decision of after school, because it doesn't, from my experience in elementary education, your cost benefit of after school is limited. You sort of mentioned it yourself, like unless you're using a program that the after school people know and that the length of time for kids. And so that's my first question for the K through 5.
Sure. Since you specifically mentioned that as a K to 5 question or to the group, I think I'm going to quickly step aside and let them answer, because you and I, as you know, have had a lot of time to discuss this in the subcommittee. I guess I'll just remind you where I think we landed at the last subcommittee meeting, and what I said tonight, if it wasn't clear, is that the first preference would be our own staff, but that we're not opposed to bringing in consultants to do the work if our staff don't want the work or can't do the work. Can't do meaning can't make themselves available because of other commitments. So I'd love to hear the elementary principals weigh in on that.
The elementary principals want to comment? Principal Wentz.
Hello again. We've had a discussion about this, and it also involves the change in time, really, with getting out of school at 2:10 and having time after school to work with students. We also think about that time where students are being pulled out of the classroom and being pulled out of the classroom. So it enables them to be in their classroom more. Again, Dr. Provost said we'd need 8 interventionists for this. I mean, I think that would almost double what we need in cost for staffing. And it just, I think the change in time is really the factor that sways our decision here too. Any other principals want to chime in?
Yeah, I will. And I'll, just reiterate what both Dr. Provost and Principal Wentz said. I think in addition to that, I'll speak for Bridge Street, we're looking at 48 students, and to try to think about 48 students getting that intervention during the school day, the disruption of them possibly being pulled out of class, which we really try not to do. If we're thinking about tier 2 is a general ed instruction and should be done in the classroom. And I think a big piece for us was the time change, the time of the school day changing, how this could support families better in the afternoon. And I will say, from a Bridge Street point of view, back when we did, and Ronnie, you'll remember this, when we offered the extra support in math before school, we had 60 kids who enrolled in that. It was very popular, I think, partly because it did support families with childcare, which I know has been brought up as a concern. And so that was a lot of, what we brought into the discussion. And I think we have an allegiance to our teachers, and we want to be able to offer this to them first, and give them the opportunity to be able to work with their students.
I can chime in too. I guess I think too about the overall quality of a school day for a student and a teacher in a classroom. And so a teacher is already dealing with a lot of pulling out for very essential services, speech and OT and Title I. And so to have a whole nother pulling out of something, I just think would be really disruptive for students and teachers. It's a lot of in and out, and then your cohesiveness of a full day of education is really disrupted. So if you want to target certain skills, that you don't want to take them away from something really rich and meaningful for that classroom for an additional intervention. You really need to extend the amount of time that a student is learning when they're behind. And so I as a classroom teacher, I would think, oh, please don't take them out again. There's so much that we're trying to do, and it's really hard to compete with all the learning that needs to be done.
I appreciate that. My second question, and it's on the K-8 lens, and I guess just to something I'm still struggling with. I definitely can understand those interruptions. At the same time, I can understand teachers feeling potential relief of getting more support during the school day. I could see it going in multiple directions that way. And just to clarify, I didn't mean having outside folks doing the after-school tutoring. I meant having outside folks coming in during the school day to add to the staffing during the school hours. But a big thing being, I know these relief funds are to catch students up, and I saw the bar graph, with the bar graph of how many kids were on grade level. Recent statewide testing shows that clearly there's academic needs K-8, certainly at JFK, especially for our high needs subgroups, our ELL subgroups, our economically disadvantaged ones. And so I guess that's where I'm left scratching my head wondering, what are we doing for, could we use these relief funds to help address that issue as well, right? Because the relief, the relief funds, if it's just targeting the COVID issue, there was academic subgroups that had academic difficulties previous to COVID, and the data is showing that. And so that's also where I'd feel like I think there needs to be more support during the school day. And if you can't add staff, I feel like the contract workers during the day might be something to do. And so I don't know, I wonder if that's something at all that was considered even, on the JFK side or elementary as well, just meeting those needs pre-COVID is that we were seeing.
Well, it definitely was seen with respect to ESL. That service, as you know, was found to be lacking in leads. And so that's why we're providing additional staffing at leads. But I have to say, we can't rely much on any pre-existing MCAS data for the middle school, because the only group that's going to be left that had any middle school data was 8th grade. That it's been 2 years since we had MCAS. So I really think the most accurate information we have about what the needs of the middle school students are is the assessment that was given just a few weeks ago. We are increasing math support, again, through the addition of the culture coach, which then creates another math interventionist. And to me, that tracks, even though I say, I don't think we can really rely too much on old MCAS scores, really old MCAS scores at this point. But the need has always been math, right? Middle school has always been above average in ELA. And to me, seeing that we have about as many interventionists as we need to help kids with reading makes sense. Adding additional staffing in math, I think, tracks with that story of, for as long as we've known JFK needs more help in math. Remember, another thing that's important here is we've never even seen the impact of our interventions, right? We started Power Math last year. I'll say it again, the last regular school meeting we had was the one in which the Power Math program was reported on, and that was for the first cohort of students. They never got to take MCAS because schools were closed down by the time that happened. So we haven't even really seen what improvements might have taken place based on the interventions that have already been put in the middle school pre-COVID.
And then I'll close on this. I hear you, Dr. Provost, in some ways the data, because MCAS data isn't reflecting the current students of the number of years. At the same time, statewide data is reflecting, isn't a reflection as much on the students, but on the school's ability to service and provide, instructional gains to the student, right? And so it just seems that there might be needing more supports there, because historically the data is pointing out that JFK has struggled to do that, regardless of what cohort or year it was. So, but I do appreciate and understand the idea of it not being current data, but it is still a reflection on the school. But thank you.
Right, and I'll 100% support your other statement about this is always about the schools. This is always about our service delivery systems for kids. It's never about shaming or blaming. It's always about trying to figure out how we can support needs better.
Okay, Member Fallon has her hand up next.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who worked on this budget. I'm really excited about so many of the additions to it. Most of the questions that I had have been asked, but Superintendent Provost, I am concerned about not knowing the numbers of kindergarten students that we will have, and not knowing how many of them are going to come in with absolutely no level of preparation for kindergarten. Because we know that enrollment was down so much, and that half of that decline almost was due to pre-K and kindergarten students. And so I guess my question is did you consider, perhaps like a similar program to that early start summer program at the middle school for incoming kindergartners who may not have had any sort of preschool preparation? Have you been coordinating with other preschool programs in the area? Rather than having to catch them up once they're in the district, I'm wondering if there's something we could be doing proactively.
I guess I will just go back to the comments made by Member Goldman. The preschool space has been very grim. It's been a hard time, and a lot of programs have closed. So I do expect that will have some kind of impact. It's hard for me to be able to judge it. We have, through our CPPI grant, been trying to support services in preschools. And as I'm sure you know, we transitioned a lot of the funding in the CPPI grant from our district staff and our own preschools to staff that we are sending to preschools in town in order to try to do that. That doesn't, that really is for special needs for the most part. It doesn't address the need that might be found by sort of typical peers not having a preschool experience, or at least not to the same extent as in the past. But again, it's one of those things that is a question mark and an unknown. It's hard to build a budget based on unknowns. There have to be some, but I think you have to go with the evidence at hand as much as possible. That being said, I will reiterate what I said at the beginning about every budget is a guess, at best. In the best of times, you're planning this 15, 18 months before you're going to be done working the budget. So there's no way it can be completely accurate to your needs. In this year, we have the idea of spending to your budget has gone completely out the window, right? We spent things that were never in the budget. We had needs that we could have never anticipated, and we had to be flexible with that. And I appreciate the flexibility that the school committee has given me. To revisit another point from earlier in the evening, this is going to change between now and June. We're going to get another chance to take a look at it in June, but I think we have to be prepared for potential variances. And so I will just put it out there that it's likely that there are some blind spots and there are some things that we don't see right now. And so we have to be able to make adjustments. And I just hope, and trust the school committee will be able to sort of hang with it if I'm saying, okay, well, we're going to have to make major readjustments. I'm sorry, there are all these things that we weren't able to accurately judge because of the COVID situation. But we have tried to judge what we can. We have tried to nail down as much as we can to try to make the area of variance as small as possible so that, we're not having completely disruptive realignments of the budget midstream. And I know that may not be a satisfying answer because, you're saying kindergarten could be much needier than typical kindergartens in the past. And I'm saying, I know, but I don't know how much, but that really is the honest answer.
Yeah, so I guess my question is do you have what is the timeline on that? When do we get to, what is our deadline for registrations from families? And don't we typically evaluate students, some sort of baseline evaluation before they enroll in September?
So the deadline is kind of an open-ended process, right? We try to get all of our students registered in the spring, but there's a tremendous amount of walk-up in kindergarten over the summer. In a normal year, there is. People are evaluating different options, and I would say over the course of the summer, we probably get 40 to 50, unanticipated kindergartners on a regular basis. And we also have a lot of kids who've registered who never show up. So that the kindergarten is always a big unknown. We will, as we bring kids into programs, we'll start assessing them, and we'll start to get a better sense of need. But I'll also say this, the initial kindergarten screenings are notoriously unreliable. A lot of the testing we do in kindergarten, we hold off until the middle of the school year because maturation is such an important process, and adjusting the kindergarten is such a process. So I'm not a kindergarten expert, but I can tell you that kindergarten is one of the areas where teachers and principals are prepared for the unknown in ways that they're not for other grades.
Okay, and then I guess my only other question is does the pandemic, is this going to affect how you treat school choice for this coming year? Will you be accepting fewer students to try and give more attention to the students we have, or is this budget assuming that we will accept the same number that we have in the past to be at full capacity?
Well, we have actually had a loss of student enrollment in school choice. Because of the pandemic, I think people have found much less of a reason to choice their students into a district that's closed, or remote, or just getting back to hybrid in a lot of grade levels. So we are actually this budget is based on a reduction in school choice of, correct me if I'm wrong, Cammie, but I think it's about $100,000. And that's just based on people who've left. That's not based on an intentional strategy of trying to reduce school choice. But we do think there'll be fewer choice students because of that dynamic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are those your final questions, Member Fallon?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Member Busansky, you have not asked a question yet, so I'll recognize you.
Thank you. Though I think it's a little unfair since we've had 2 rounds of meetings with Dr. Provost, and I've asked many questions then, but I'm very happy because I have a couple more to come to ask now. So I'm just curious, we hadn't seen this chart on the current scope of recovery needs in terms of social, emotional, and academic behavior functioning. And I know it only goes up through grade 7, and but I am really struck by how the social emotional needs really increases by grade. And I understand you may not want to speculate on what it looks like on high school, but I think just given everything that we've read and heard, that, you know, I would imagine that it's going to be pretty high at the high school also. And I'm just concerned in the high school proposal that there isn't really anything that's going to be dealing with that social emotional, I think, crisis that our high schoolers and middle schoolers and high schoolers are going through. But, you know, we have the culture coordinator, we have some other things in place. I think it seems like you're taking a really, you know, proactive approach in middle school. And I don't feel like it's reflected in the budget in the high school, and just erring on the side of caution that maybe there's a need for another, you know, adjustment counselor. I mean, I know even pre-pandemic, Kathy Goodwin Boyd was way over, you know, she was booked solid, and you could barely find time, you know, a lot of students could barely find time to meet with her or others. And so I don't know, could you just address that for us? But that is just a lingering concern, especially after seeing this chart tonight.
Yeah, it's a concern for me too. I think the overall thing that strikes me about these results is how much what we're seeing is internalizing issues rather than externalizing issues. And it typically is the externalizing issues that get your attention in a school. Because those are the ones that, like disruption, fighting, etc. And kids can fly underneath the radar screen with some of their internalizing their feelings. When you look at what are the actual questions asked on the screener, you could understand why that might be in the context of this pandemic. You know, the things that come up around the emotional scale are things like fearfulness, worry, sadness, which is, I think, a very normal and healthy response to being now on almost 12 months of pandemic. So I think that some of that may be mitigated by getting kids back to school. You know, I think some of what they're fearful about and sad about and worried about is the complete unknown of every part of their life. You know, we've seen it with athletes who haven't been able to have their season. We've seen it with seniors right now. I mean, Principal Valancourt and I had a discussion this morning about something they might want to do in lieu of the prom. And I said, well, it's good to have a plan, but what happens if people start having proms? You know, then students are going to be feeling potentially left out about that, which is not to say it's a bad plan. It's student-led and I support it and all that, but everything you normally do that provides comfort, that provides any kind of sense of security has been stripped away. And I think just the fact of getting back to school will be helpful. I'm so sad that I've been among one of the casualties of things that I've had to push to the side this week because of the other issues of going on is I haven't been able to be there for the return of students to the high school, either in group A or group B. I sure hope I can get there for group C because the reports from the staff have been that the kids just love being back, even if it's only one day a week. It's the thing that's bringing them back. It's bringing them a sense of hope. And so I think that in itself is going to be a strong intervention. But I saw Kara turned her camera on, so I think she might want to speak to that.
I was just going to say that I have anecdotally just had some really great conversations with kids who are back in the building, and I have also seen it in our staff, just how much better people are already starting to feel just being able to be back together. I will also say that we have 5 adjustment counselors in the building. While Kathy Goodwin-Boyd does meet with a wide variety of students, we do have 5 school adjustment counselors who are supporting our students. We also have our counselors in the school counseling department. Our school nurse is definitely a supportive resource for us. And then I do think that once we get back to a sense where kids can start to participate in the things that bring them great joy outside of the academic experience, drama, band, athletics, other after school clubs, and they're able to get together, I do think we'll see an improvement in the social emotional experience. But we also don't have that the data to be able to be really thoughtful about what that might look like. And so I think that's our next step, is to nail down the data first and be able to report out on what that looks like, and then be able to make some adjustments as we move forward.
You know, I really appreciate that response, but, you know, we also heard from, you know, the parent, Amy Martin, tonight, who came and spoke to us a year ago about the mental health needs at the high school. And that was even before the pandemic hit. And I just think we know that the writing is on the wall, that while getting them back in the building, extracurricular activities, all of that certainly will be helpful. There's going to be a lot of fallout in terms of mental health needs. And we just didn't have enough before, and I don't think we have enough now. And now we have the opportunity with these relief funds. And I think that we should be doing more to support the social emotional needs at the high school level. And we should be, you know, really reflecting it in our budget. I think we should be seeing it on this page. And I can't really exactly put my finger, of course, on exactly what it should be, but I think we could err on the side of caution. And then it would not be a permanent position. If we hired someone, it would be a consultant. We could always tweak it or change it as needed, as we all know, just like we're taking so many guesses with so much else. I just don't know why we wouldn't, just based on everything we knew pre-pandemic and now during the pandemic. It's not going to all go away with, there's just no way it's going to just go away by just getting them back in the building. We just know that, I think. So
I don't disagree with you. I'm not naive to the idea that all of a sudden these things will shift. I will say that between this time last year and this year, we actually added an adjustment counselor to be able to alleviate some of the stressors and the workload, to be honest, around all of the students who are needing additional supports. And so I think unfortunately, we can't see the true benefit of how that has shifted in adding an adjustment counselor, because then we went right into COVID, into closure and COVID. But I do think that the addition of that 5th adjustment counselor has made an impact and will make a greater impact when we are all able to be back together.
Okay. And we do have the relationship with CSO at the high school. And as I said, I'm trying to communicate with them about expanding the capacity so that, you know, much as you said, we could flex some resources in. We might not need them on a permanent basis, but we could have agencies to turn to if we find that we're understaffed with social emotional needs.
Okay, well, that's all really good to hear. Thank you. It makes me feel a lot better. I was also curious in the last 2 iterations, Dr. Provost, you had the chart on AP classes and the progress that, and I realized, you can't keep it all in, and somehow it got dropped out in this iteration and replaced by something else. But I just hope at some point you'll share it with the school committee and our school community about how much progress we have made about the high school has made at getting more disadvantaged kids, children, students of color, et cetera, into taking AP classes. I think it's just a victory that's, seems like it's, an accomplishment that's worth sharing.
I totally agree. I'm so proud of that work. And, teachers too, a lot of AP enrollments happen because teachers are encouraging kids to take a chance, and counselors are encouraging kids to take a chance. So we want to definitely keep that up, and it has been successful.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Let me just see if I had any other questions. I guess I'm wondering on the, textbook budgeting for the middle school, not to go back over it, but just curious that if we have any estimate of how much you think we're going to have, and I know we don't have a really hard and fast estimate that we'd be able to spend just out of our budget by the end of the year, just closing up books, and that we might be able to take some of that money, anyway, just reduce the amount that's going into this budget, so we could just look at maybe something that's a little more accurate.
So I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that.
Yeah.
We're estimating we can do the $91,000 for the history and geography textbooks from reserves this year. So that would only leave the $15,000 for the pilot science program to be spent out of recovery funds.
Okay, and is there any thought that you would use that 91,000 in some other way, or it would just save us money that we get to then, use later on? As we know, this is a multi-year effort.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, the 91,000 is still showing up in this, first view budget. So,
oh yes, okay. Yeah, I get what you mean.
Another way.
So what happens is that 91,000 that we're spending out of this year's funds shows up again on slide 24 in the available funds for FY22, because instead of hitting the recovery for that amount, we're saving that recovery amount, which then shows up in 22 and follows through the 23.
Got it. Okay, great. So it's reflected in that slide. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for your help and the help of your subcommittee to get this ready for tonight.
Yeah, well, it was, anyway, we've come a long way, so it's great. Thanks.
Member Voss.
Thank you. I'm also on the subcommittee, so I've heard this, and it has come a long way, and thank you to everybody who's worked so hard on it in such a crazy time. I'm looking over at my notes here. I guess Superintendent Provost used a word blind spot earlier, and I think that's a really good word to describe where we're headed in terms of how we support all our students over the next couple of years. And I really agree, and we talked about this in our subcommittee with what Member Busansky shared about just, we don't really know what these, let's just say 6th to 12th graders might need in ways of support beyond in the social emotional kinds of ways. And I really appreciate everybody's tried hard to figure that out. And it's just, there's a lack of information, and that's where I come back to your term blind spot in a sense. So I'm concerned that there's not enough support, but I also wouldn't know what, and I think that's maybe what we're all struggling with, is what do we need to do to help students and support them as best as we can. So a question I have, and maybe a way to think about moving forward in that regard, is some of this money is around for the next 3 years, which in a lot of ways is a really big gift, because usually we go year to year. And I know Ms. Lamica has really encouraged the subcommittee to think about it in chunks of 3. And I hear that, but I also want to just ask if we go ahead as you've proposed it, but we find that any of our students, but maybe some of the older ones where there's a little less directed at immediate catch-up types of activities, need more support. What kind of flexibility do we have in next year's budget to say, well, let's spend another $100,000 or $200,000 and support kids right away as we come out of this pandemic, instead of trying to save it for year 3. And I'm not saying spend it all right away. I'm just saying what kind of so this is my first question. What kind of flexibility do we have in coming back next year and reallocating this when it becomes more clear where the biggest needs might be?
So there's a sort of general level answer to that, and also a very specific technical answer to that. I'm gonna attempt to address the general piece of it, and would ask Cami to join us on the specific piece. In general, and the alt team has heard me say this many times. The school committee has heard me say this many times. There is a severe limitation with any kind of planning. And that is, your plan gives you your overall picture of what you're trying to achieve, but you can never, in a $40 million budget that involves, more than 3,000 individuals, there's no way that you can have a good enough crystal ball to anticipate what all your needs are. In most years, in every year up to this, we've been able to address the issues of the unanticipated consequences, the blind spots, the unseen needs through the transfer process. And the reason you have transfers to approve on just about every budget, or every month rather, is that we're constantly transferring money within the budget in order to try to shift resources from place to place to address needs. What might be different about this year is we might have to go beyond that overall amount to tap into some of this reserve. Now, the technical question is the more we tap into the reserve now, the less flexibility we have to do the same thing in the future. And so Cami has a way of looking at this and has made some recommendations about what we want, how you manage that balance. And that's really a financial question based on her area of expertise. So I think she can advise you best on that.
And if you don't mind, I'll just specifically say, Cami, what I'm trying to understand is, we usually go on an annual budget and you can't borrow from the next budget. That's not something you can do. But this is, I think, a different case because some of these federal funds are valid across multi-years of what our annual budget is. So if you could address that too, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So one of the things I wanted to tell the entire committee, because it's the same thing that we've gone over in the budget subcommittee, is when you have multi-year grants like this at any kind of economic downturn like this, and the last two John and I have gone through have been financially related. This one's financially related in addition to health related issues that are affecting it. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same kind of things that we've seen in 2003, 2004, and again in 2008, 2009. It's multi-year. It's not just 1 year and then the next year you're okay. So you get a number of stimulus dollars pumped in from a number of sources, and you've got to figure out what it is you need to get you whole, to keep your services going on a multi-year basis to get you through. So one of the things that we've looked at is there's a number of things we needed to do this year. We had a number of relief funds available to us this year. Like Dr. Provost had mentioned, we were able to buy the HEPA filters, buy a number of Chromebooks, buy a number of, keep the food service program going to feed families, a number of all the PPE, all those things were done with all the relief funds because we didn't have that in our budget, not at all. So we're trying to look at it. We're still getting information every day about they're changing what we can use it for when the reporting periods and when the grants are expiring. So one of the things that we're trying to do as it goes is what can we buy now? What can we look at for next year? How can we strategically plan next year? How much of those funds do we need? And be able to carry some of the money to the next year to get us through 2 more fiscal years, meaning the year that we're coming up on, fiscal 22 and fiscal 23, when the grant money runs out. Hopefully by the time the grant money runs out, you have not implemented a number of positions that you can then not sustain in your budget when the grant goes away, or you have helped fill your needs with your students that hopefully those services aren't needed any longer at the end of 2 years. That would be the goal. So what I had recommended to the budget committee and we've talked about at the alt team is there's a number of grants that end by this June. We're going to buy as much as we can and spend it getting the things in place by this June. I had recommended for next year using $500,000 of the $1.4 million for next year. And that's what you're seeing in this budget proposal, roughly about $500,000 of next year's money being able to be used, which leaves you about $900,000 for fiscal 23 to continue the services for the second year. So there'd be money. Can you use a little bit more than the 500? Yes. But if you use $1 million next year, you only have 400 the next year. And if you have another $1 million worth of services you need it to keep going in the second year, you don't have it. And also, what I've said to the budget committee, we don't know exactly where the city finances will be for next year. They have revenue sources coming in. Their revenues have had impact as well from the economy. So the city is also trying to figure out their revenue sources that come in from the state. All that information is still a moving target right now. I know it's a lot of money that you're looking at, and I've gone through this twice already in years past. Do not count on what you don't have already. Please don't do that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that answer. I have one other comment and one other question, but just to follow up on what Ms. Lamica just shared, we did talk about this, and I guess where I'm sitting at right now and really building on what Member Busanski talked about in terms of supporting our students in areas that we don't know exactly how to support them or what the need really is just knowing that there is that money there that we could look at. And I'm not comfortable with the proposal in terms of the lack of support for the social emotional needs of our really all our students, but these older ones that we don't really know where they're at right now. But I would be comfortable with it if maybe at the next presentation we could just have some ideas shared with how we could monitor those students and figure out what might be needed in the future, with a idea of we'll come back and ask for us to consider spending some of that money. And if need be, if the educators feel they do need more support. And I think it's important to just name that and say there is money there, because that's what this money is for. It's for supporting our students. And this is a really different situation. I guess I look at it slightly different, and I really appreciate the budget perspective that was just shared. But the first year in my mind is going to be the toughest. Kids are coming back. They've had this horrific year. They've had learning loss. They've had social emotional loss. They've had all sorts of loss. And I think the first year front loading some of the support makes a lot of sense to get as many people caught up as quickly as they can be in all these different realms. And by the second and third year, I would hope, yes, we still need to support them, but I would hope that some kids would need less. So that's just a perspective I've developed over these meetings and what I'd be comfortable with. And then I also just want to echo, it's really amazing to see how at least this testing, what it shows in our older kids, and that they're not further behind to the extent the testing is accurate. And I think that really is kudos to our educators who are working so hard on remote teaching. And as somebody who teaches remote every day, I know how tired we all are, and thank you. It's really amazing to see how well the students are performing. And my final question is, again, not to be solved tonight, but I'm really concerned about our ability to buy textbooks in general. And I was concerned about this. This is my fourth year being concerned about it. So every textbook proposal that was brought that we saw is really compelling, and I support them. I'm worried that if COVID hadn't happened, we wouldn't have been able to get textbooks, because it seems to me that we're either paying for the textbooks out of money we didn't spend this year because buses and utility bills were less, or we're going to spend it out of stimulus money that is supposed to go towards supporting catching up of our students. And I'm really pushing us to find money that isn't in the stimulus, and maybe just money we saved, because that feels like where it should come out of the budget. But my question, and maybe next time, Superintendent Provost, you could share your thoughts on this is moving forward in this budget of ours in Northampton. How are we going to build in textbook funds? We have to find a place for them. I don't have an answer, but I think we need to do that. And I look forward to that continued conversation and figuring it out. Thanks.
Okay, Member Levy.
Thanks. I just have what I think is a quick question about busing for the plan for transportation for the students who would do the after school work. Can you just really quickly give a snapshot of what that would look like?
Sure. So much like the personnel with the program, there's a different kind of a loading chart that you make for buses. So there are a different number of busing needs that we had identified for each school based on the area they serve and the number of students that they want that would be attending. So it's a mix of our own drivers and own buses and Durham buses that we'd be using to accomplish the after school transportation. But basically what would happen is after the third tier is completed, then a number of buses would be rerouted for a fourth tier to go back to the elementary schools and pick up the students and bring them home.
And is there capacity on those buses to serve students who are using after school programming, but not a part of this program?
That's a really interesting question. We built it to the size of the program, but it's not going to be exact. So I'm sure there would be a few seats in some cases, which then would probably have to be awarded on a lottery basis if we did something like that. So something we could look into.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the fact that we've been told for the last year how hard it is to arrange for buses that are outside of the typical schedule. And so I appreciate that you've come up with a system for this. And I wonder if we can be creative about thinking about the number of students who, we have very large numbers of students in the elementary schools who do after school programming. And I wonder if it's without adding a huge amount to the budget, if we're able to expand it slightly. It's just something to think about. I'd be curious to see what those numbers might be.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions tonight? Obviously, this is the first view of the budget, and we have several other meetings scheduled, and hopefully we'll get some public comment as well. Is that a hand? I'm sorry, Member Voss. Sorry.
It's quick. Sorry. Member Levy's comment is in all brainstorming capacities. Just gave. Sorry, I was muted. Member Levy's comment gave me a brainstorming idea that I just would put out there in terms of what I said and supporting high school students. And that would be, stimulus money potentially for a couple of years to support a late bus at the high school. And that could support social emotional needs and academic needs. So just to put that out there as a possibility to think about if moving forward.
Okay. Any other comments or questions this evening about the first view budget? Okay. So hearing none, thank you, Dr. Provost, again to you and your team for the work you put into this, and obviously to our Budget and Property Committee for its work, reviewing it with you and getting it to where it is for tonight's presentation. We have a series of future business and meeting dates. Our next school committee meeting will be March 11th, 2021. Rules and Policy Subcommittee is scheduled for March 18th. Then we have our second school committee meeting of March on the 25th at 6:45. And then we have two retreats scheduled, 2021 retreats scheduled, one on April 29th and the other on June 17th. There is no other business on our agenda. So, I'm sorry, Dr. Provost.
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand on this either. Anyways, Normally,
I thought you were going to start the wave. I wasn't doing.
Normally at the conclusion of this meeting, I get just a sense of the committee if I have their support to go forward and develop the budget book, because that would be presented at the next meeting, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to do that. So understanding there could be other little minor changes we were talking about, could I just ask for a sense of the committee if there's support for this general direction? Okay, thank you. Think I got what I need.
Okay, got some real and virtual thumbs ups. So, okay, so I would then return to my question. Is there anyone who wishes to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Member Busansky.
Yes.
Member Fallon. Member Seraphy Cox.
Yes.
Member Condon.
Yes.
Member Levy.
Yes.
Member Kaufman.
Yes.
Member Goldman.
Yes.
Member Voss.
Yes.
Member Gold.
Yes.
And Mayor Narcoitz.
Yes.
Vote is 10 in favor.
Okay, so the motion carries, and this Thursday, February 25th, 2021 meeting of the Northampton School Committee is adjourned. Have a good evening.